Chapter 413. Mr. Mo, you don't come back every day, and Madam is getting thinner by the day. If this situation continues, I'm afraid I won't be able to keep it a secret. Elder Mo has always thought that the two of you are fine. If something happens to Madam, I won't be able to take responsibility. After hanging up, Mo Jingshan suddenly recalled that night 3 days ago, in the hotel opposite Jiaolan Bar. Jean Wan was still awakened by the cold. She did not know how she had fallen asleep in the bathtub, nor how long she had slept for. She only felt that her entire body was cold. She instinctively felt that she could not continue sleeping here. She raised her hand and tried to hold on to the edge of the bathtub to get out of the water. However, waves of cramping pain came from her calf. The pain was sudden and sharp, causing her to tremble in the water. It was so painful that her entire body was stiff, as though she did not have the strength to move. How long exactly had she slept here? Why was it so cold? Her fingers moved in the water. They felt numb. She wanted to turn her head to look for her phone, but she remembered that her phone and bag were placed by the bed. She had no choice but to raise her hand with great difficulty to continue holding on to the edge of the bathtub. However, the intense pain in her leg left her with no strength to even cry out, much less raise her hand. With great difficulty, she managed to raise her 5 fingers before returning them to their original position. Just the act of raising her fingers seemed to have consumed all of her strength. So cold, the pain in her leg came without warning, but bit by bit, it tore at her nerves. It was as though if not for the sudden cramping pain in her leg, she would not have woken up at all. Jean Wan's head was very dizzy. What surged forward was the boundless fear and loneliness in the darkness. She felt as though she was about to fall into an endless abyss, but there was nothing she could hold on to. This hotel was very luxurious. The bathrooms were air-conditioned, and the air was very cold. Jean Wan could no longer get up. She leaned against the water, her towel hanging on a nearby shelf. She looked at the distance of only 1 or 2 meters and felt that it was very strenuous. The pain in her calf came one after another. It was so painful that her entire body was convulsing. When she lowered her head, she could see the blue veins on her calf twitching. It was indeed a cramp. After sitting in the water for a long time, she finally realized that the water was actually cold. How long had she slept here? It was clearly warm before she fell asleep. Even if she wanted to get up now, she couldn't. She stared at the temperature displayed in the air conditioner on the wall. In a daze, darkness once again occupied the nerves that were barely awake because of the throbbing pain in her calf. All the clear senses gradually became blurred, and she fell into darkness. No one answered Jean Wan's call again and again. Mo Jingshan walked to the door of the room where Jean Wan lived. His cell phone was still dialing. When he approached, he heard the familiar ringtone inside, but no one answered it for a long time. "Open the door." He subconsciously grabbed the phone and ordered in a deep voice. The room service staff hurriedly took the room card and went to open the door. As she swiped the card, she explained, "Before this lady checked in, she specifically told us not to go in and disturb her, so we didn't go in for the past 2 days. Moreover, she paid enough room fees, so Mo Jingshan ignored her." The moment the door opened, he had already walked in. The moment the door opened, the cold air in the room was enough to cause all the hair on one's body to stand on end. This was an ordinary-sized room. With one glance, he could see the bottom of the room. Jean Wan's figure was not on the bed. There was only a cell phone and a bag. The man's tall and straight figure directly walked into the bathroom. The cold air in the bathroom was even more bone-chilling. Mo Jingshan's heart thumped. An ominous feeling instantly grew stronger. He turned his eyes to see Jean Wan lying in the bathtub with a pale complexion and purple lips. She just lay quietly in the water, motionless. What's going on? The room service staff was a middle-aged woman. The moment she entered, she felt the cold air in the room. She turned to see the scene in the bathroom and subconsciously cried out. Mo Jingshan immediately leaned over to help Jean Wan up. Thankfully, the design of the bathtub was more user-friendly. There was a support point for her head to lean against. Otherwise, she would have fainted and drowned in the water. Jean Wan. The moment the man helped her up, he felt the coldness of her body. It was so cold that it seemed as though she was already dead. There was no warmth at all. Chapter 4:14. The room service staff hurriedly nodded in panic and ran out to make a phone call. Before he carried her out of the bathroom, he turned off the air conditioner in the room and carried her to the bed. He raised his hand to touch her face. It was still hot. Mo Jingshan picked up Jean Wan, who was dripping wet, and carried her out of the bathroom. If Jean Wan had been in the bathtub 2 days ago, it meant that she had been soaking in the cold water for 2 whole days. The woman's body seemed to have been frozen stiff. Except for the burning heat on her face, which proved that she was still alive, everything else was unusually quiet. Mo Jingshan put his hand on her neck and looked at her pale, bloodless face. For a moment, he stiffly held Jean Wan. The woman seemed to have no signs of life. He could only feel a very weak pulse on her neck, but it was so weak that it seemed that it would stop in the next second. He mechanically hugged her and wrapped the blanket around her. His palms rubbed against her palms in vain, trying to warm up her cold body, even if it was just a little bit. He did not dare to get close to her breath, fearing that he could not feel any breath except for the pulse on her neck. The ambulance rushed over, and the medical staff rushed in with the hotel staff. The doctor checked Jean Wan's body and anxiously asked the others to carry her into the car and send her to the hospital immediately. They could not waste a second. In the ambulance, the medical staff were busy, and Mo Jingshan sat by the stretcher bed. In his impression, Jean Wan loved to take baths and often liked to fall asleep in the bathtub. He was always worried that if she fell asleep in the bathtub, she might catch a cold or drown if something happened to her. She had been frozen when she was a child, and her body was still cold, so she was very afraid of the cold. She liked to snuggle into his coat in winter and lean against his arms to keep warm. When she slept, she liked to snuggle against him when it was cold, squirming in his arms, and looking for the warmest position to sleep. What he was most worried about suddenly became a reality overnight. At this moment, Jean Wan was lying quietly and motionless, her hands hanging by her sides without any reaction, and her body was not warm at all. The doctor was doing all kinds of emergency measures and kept urging the driver to hurry up. The ambulance rushed from the hotel to the hospital and was sent directly to the emergency room. When Qin Siding heard the news and rushed over, the first person he saw was Mo Jingshan. When he fell down, Jean Wan was still in the emergency room, and there was a red light on the door. Qin Siding glanced at the time and frowned. How long has she been in there? When the nurse at the side saw that Dr. Qin had actually come down personally, her expression was just as ugly. She immediately replied with a fearful expression, "He's been in there for 20 minutes." The patient was soaked in low-temperature air and cold water for a long time, causing a high fever of 40 degrees. Coupled with insufficient blood supply to the brain, when he was sent here, he was already in severe shock and convulsions. His breathing and heartbeat are very weak. We don't know how he'll be at the moment, but when Dr. Qin was in another operating room, the director had already sent Dr. Chen and Dr. Su in. Qin Siding didn't say more. He took a look at Mo Jingshan and knew the seriousness of the matter from his expression. He turned to make a call, applied for permission from the director of the emergency room, and went straight into the emergency room. Qin Siding and the other 2 doctors walked out. Qin Siding did not say anything. When Mo Jingshan looked at him, He nodded at him and turned to change his clothes. Dr. Sue walked out to say, "Mr. Mo, our hospital has Mrs. Mo's past medical records. Earlier, during the emergency treatment, we took some time to check." Dr. Sue walked out and said, "Mr. Mo, Mrs. Mo's past medical records are all available in our hospital. Just now, during the emergency treatment, we took some time to check. Mrs. Mo has a cold uterus and just experienced a traumatic abortion a few months ago. Her physical condition has always been very weak, and it seems like she hasn't had much time to recuperate. Her high fever in itself is very dangerous, and she was also soaked in cold water for a long period of time. When she was sent to the hospital, her convulsions were really very dangerous. Luckily, Dr. Chin has a good understanding of all aspects of her condition. With Dr. Chin's participation, our emergency measures were very successful. Currently, her fever has already subsided, and her limbs are no longer cramping and convulsing. However, it's already dark now. It's best if someone stays in her room at night to prevent another high fever or other situations." At this moment, Jin Wan had already been pushed out. Mo Jingshan's gaze landed on Jin Wan, who was still deep asleep on the bed. Dr. Su did not say more. He turned back to speak with Qin Siding for a while and nodded at him. He then had the nurses move Jin Wan to her room. In the room, Auntie Chin rushed to the hospital to take care of her after receiving the news. It was not until midnight that Auntie Chin went to the nurse's break room to sleep. Mo Jingshan stood by the window, his back facing everything in the room. He stood tall and cold, as though he was aloof from the world. No one knew what he was thinking about. This was the scene Qin Siding saw when he pushed open the door. He walked in. Jin Wan is fine. Although she has a high fever, it didn't develop into pneumonia. This means that her physical condition is not bad. It's just that she's afraid of the cold. After all, it's an old problem. Although her condition was critical when she was sent to the emergency room, compared to when you were sent to the hospital in Los Angeles covered in blood, this is nothing. Even you can endure it. She won't have any problems. Don't worry too much. Qin Siding's voice broke the deathly silence. The man by the window remained silent. Seeing that Jin Wan was still sleeping, Qin Siding walked over to pick up the thermometer to test her temperature. After seeing that she did not have a fever after being resuscitated, he placed the thermometer back into the pocket of his white coat and turned to look at the man standing by the window. "Ever since you came back from America, you haven't had a single normal day. We've been brothers for so many years, but I really can't understand it. You clearly love Jin Wan to an extent that no one can compare to, yet you insist on pushing her so far away. It wasn't easy for you to come back from the gates of hell. Can't you just live a normal life? Why must you get a divorce? Must you torture a good relationship to such a state?" Qin Siding glanced at Jin Wan as he spoke. He saw that her eyes were tightly shut. She had really been sleeping and could not hear their conversation. His heart softly sighed. What does it matter if I really love her to an extent that no one can compare to? Mo Jingshan's voice was very mild, and the indifferent curve of his lips was almost invisible. His eyes were calm and indifferent, as though the person who carried Jin Wan into the ambulance during the day was not him. The large room in the ward became cold and silent because of his voice. Chapter 4:15. Qin Siding could feel the bone-chilling coldness from his words. He turned to look at him. Others might not understand, but how could Jin Wan not understand? She persevered for so long because she didn't believe that you would be heartless just because you said so. How could she believe that you wouldn't love her just because you said so? Mo Jingshan turned to look at the woman lying on the bed whose face was pale as though she did not have any breath of life. Towards her, it does take some effort. So, step by step, you bullied her until she became like this. Mo Jingshan only listened and did not respond. Qin Siding suddenly thought of something. What did you say to her? After so long, I saw that she was still lively and lively. No matter what she did, at least she had a goal. Why did she suddenly become so depressed in one night? Mo Jingshan looked out of the window expressionlessly. There was no reply. Because he said that Mo Jingshan was already dead. Was he really dead? The ward was very large, spacious, empty, and silent. The silence made one panic. Jin Wan fainted for 2 days and slept in the hospital for another 2 days. However, she was not completely asleep. She would wake up occasionally, but the time she woke up was relatively short. Not long after opening her eyes, she would fall asleep again. Finally, on the 3rd morning, when she woke up, she walked out of her muddle-headed state. However, her throat was so sore that it felt as though it was filled with sand. When she opened her eyes, she saw Auntie Chin, Xia Tian, and Xiao Ba were all in the ward. It was the same as when she slept and woke up. At that time, she seemed to have seen Auntie Chin, who was a servant of the Ji family. It turned out that in the few days she slept, everyone she was familiar with had come to the hospital. You're awake. Xia Tian was still talking to Xiao Ba when she suddenly noticed that Jin Wan's eyes were half open. She immediately reached out to touch her head. How long do you plan to stay awake this time? Are you going to continue sleeping? You didn't have a fever these 2 days. Don't tell me you're going to sleep for so long. Jin Wan did not close her eyes. She quietly watched her for a long time. Xia Tian waved her hand in front of her eyes. Hey, my ancestor, don't sleep too much these 2 days. Dr. Qin said that you only had a high fever. It can't be that bad, right? Jin Wan closed her eyes again and then opened them again, saying hoarsely, Stop shaking. If you keep shaking, I'll really fall asleep again. Hearing Jin Wan's words, Xiao Ba and Auntie Chin rushed over from the side. You're awake. Are you really awake? Jin Wan looked at them and then at Xia Tian. She had no recollection of how she ended up in the hospital again. However, when she heard Xia Tian mention Dr. Qin, she roughly knew something. She just did not ask. She only remembered that she had taken a shower in the hotel. It was too cold at the time and she was unwilling to come out of the hot water. Later, she felt that it was too comfortable and fell asleep. Then he woke up with what seemed to be a cramp in his leg. After a while, he lost consciousness. He didn't sleep for long, but when he woke up, he was really awake. Boss, you're finally awake. You've been sleeping for 2 days. Xiao Ba said beside the bed. When Dr. Qin called us, he said that you were in the hospital and you were still unconscious. I was scared to death. Auntie Qin smiled. It's good that you're awake. It's fine now that you're awake. In the afternoon, Jin Wan had already been awake for several hours. Seeing that she had no intention of sleeping again, Xia Tian finally allowed her to sit up and allowed Xiao Ba to help her shake the bed. While Xia Tian rushed back to the studio because of a call from the studio, Jin Wan sent a message to Xiao Ba, asking her to bring a document from the bottom drawer of her desk when she returned to the hospital with Xia Tian. Chapter 4:16. It's a document sent from MO Corporation 2 months ago. I didn't open it. Back then, you were the one who helped me sign for it. You even asked what it was. You should have some impression of it. Oh, I remember now. I'll go look for it. After hanging up, Jin Wan calmly looked at the darkened screen of her phone. A moment later, Jin Wan called someone else. I've agreed to the plan to expand the studio to London. I'll personally go to London to sign the contract. After making all the arrangements, Jin Wan slept for a long time. She slept for more than 24 hours. Auntie Chin was so frightened that she rushed to call Dr. Chin over. In the end, Chin Sighting examined Jean Wan and rolled his eyes. I thought something had happened. It's just a nap. What's there to be nervous about? But Madam woke up yesterday. When she woke up, she seemed fine. Why did she sleep for so long? It's just a deep sleep. She'll wake up on her own when she wants to. Chin Sighting retracted his stethoscope and glanced at Jean Wan on the bed before turning to leave. Seeing that Dr. Chin had already said so, Auntie Chin could only wait by the bedside. Xia Tian and Xiao Ba returned to the studio after a busy day. That night, Jean Wan finally woke up. Just as Chin Sighting said, she only slept for a little longer than usual. However, when she woke up, her mental state seemed much better. The moment Jean Wan opened her eyes, she saw the sunset glow on the horizon. The window was open, and the air was clean and cool. She held on to the edge of the bed and slowly sat up. Boss, you're awake. The moment Xiao Ba entered, she saw Jean Wan sitting up on the bed. She rushed over to point at the document by her bedside. Is this what you were talking about yesterday? Jean Wan turned to look at it. Yes. What's in it? This package has been sent to you for a long time, hasn't it? When I dug it out yesterday, I found that it hadn't been opened, Xiao Ba said as she opened the thermos flask with Auntie Chin, intending to let Jean Wan eat something. Did you bring a pen? Jean Wan asked. Xiao Ba rummaged through her bag and found a ball pen. Yes, but boss, what do you need a pen for? Put it down. You guys go out first. Auntie Chin and Xiao Ba looked at each other. Xia Tian was not in the ward now, so they didn't have much idea. Seeing that Jean Wan seemed to be fine, they put down the vacuum flask and turned to go out. They closed the door of the ward from the outside. Jean Wan pushed aside the blankets and got off the bed. She picked up the package on the bedside table and tore open the seal. She took out the A4 paper inside. On the first page, the words, divorce agreement, were written clearly and glaringly. She only glanced at the first 4 words and did not look at the contents of the other pages. She turned to the last page, opened the pen that little Aid had placed there, and wrote her name in the female signature column. There were 2 copies of the divorce agreement. When Jean Wan picked up the second copy to sign, Xia Tian pushed the door open and came in. Seeing the word divorce from afar, Xia Tian's eyelids twitched. She abruptly rushed forward but was still a step too late. Jean Wan placed the signed agreement back into the paper bag and resealed it. Are you crazy? Xia Tian asked in disbelief. Send it back for me tomorrow, Jean Wan said calmly. Xia Tian rushed to press down on the paper bag by her hand. She turned to look at Jean Wan's calm expression. Who was the one who said that she would never divorce Mo Jingshan in this lifetime? What's with this divorce agreement? Why did you sign it? When did you print the divorce agreement? Why do you want a divorce? Jean Wan looked at her. The divorce agreement was sent to me by Mo Jingshan some time ago. Xia Tian's expression faltered. As though she understood something from Jean Wan's gaze and tone, she slowly moved her hand away from the paper bag. After a long moment, she said, You've been quiet all this time. Is this what you've been holding back on? Jean Wan did not answer. She only said, I've agreed to Mr. Zan's suggestion. I'm preparing to go to England. Do you and Xiao Ba want to go with me? Xia Tian's breath was stuck in her throat. Let's not talk about your divorce first. But now that the studio has developed to this stage and has just moved to a new location, even if you want more and better opportunities, you can work with BGY or WK. Why must you go so far away to England? Mr. Zand is famous in England's financial world for his devilish hands. He can indeed help you, but if you work with him, you won't be able to return home for a long time. Are you sure you want to give up on these? Jean Wan calmly curved her lips. Because if I go to London, I'll be able to earn more from Mr. Zand's side. After all, BGY and WK haven't brought in any foreign investors yet. I'm taking a step ahead now. By the time WK and BGY's performance soars in the country, our studio will have already soared and developed even faster than them. Who said that my goal is only a small studio? Who said that I can only rely on the resources of various large property companies in the country to survive? We can clearly do better than them, can't we? Xia Tian choked. She understood Jean Wan too well. At this moment, all she could say was, "Must you leave? Is there any reason why I must stay in High City?" Jean Wan asked. Nonsense. It's not like you can't live without a man. You still have me. There's also the G family. There are so many people. It's not like I won't return. It's just that a Sino-foreign joint venture needs some time to grow. Coincidentally, I still need you to stay behind to help me oversee the studio in High City. If Xiao Ba is willing to leave with me, let her come with me. She can also train. What about Imo Jingshan? Divorce is only a legal formality. Can you really let go of him? Can you really forget him? Of course. He's already dead. What's there to be unable to let go of? 2 days later, MO Corporation suddenly received a package from the same city. The sender was Jean Wan, and the recipient was Imo Jingshan. Because Imo Jingshan had gone to a nearby city last night and would only be able to rush back this afternoon, Shenmu went to receive the package. Due to his work habits, all packages that appeared in the company had to be checked by Shenmu first before being delivered to Mo Jingshan. Thus, Shenmu did not hesitate to open the package. After reading the contents of the package, Shenmu was stunned. He rushed to give Jean Wan a call, attempting to find some clues from her words. However, she did not have the slightest intention to deny it. Jean Wan's counterattack was swift and merciless. The person she attacked was unable to retaliate at all. Even when Mo Jingshan returned to the company before the sky turned dark, Shenmu had yet to get off work. He brought the package into his office. CEO Mo, this is something that Mrs. Mo sent over. Shenmu weighed his tone. It's 2 copies of her signed divorce papers. Chapter 4:17. Seeing his boss's reaction, Shenmu didn't dare to speak at this moment. He hesitated before asking, "Well, should I leave it here or just ignore it and send it back?" Mo Jingshan looked at the 2 agreements in his hand and threw the pen on the table. "Put it down. Go out first." Shenmu had to walk to the desk and put down the agreement. Then, not daring to look at CEO Mo's face again, he quickly slipped out. The office was empty and quiet. Mo Jingshan picked up the divorce agreement on the table and glanced at it. Jean Wan's handwriting was very beautiful. It was not the regular hairpin-style small regular script. The slightly connected strokes were elegant and a bit free and easy. It could be seen that she did not hesitate at all when she wrote. Every stroke was very smooth. When Mo Jingshan received the divorce agreement, Jean Wan had been discharged from the hospital. That night, Mo Jingshan returned to the Yew Garden Villa. The servants in the villa were all there, including Auntie Chin, but Jean Wan was nowhere to be seen. From 7 p.m. to midnight, Jean Wan did not come back. Although she had agreed to the divorce agreement was made by the company's legal department. Now, because she had suddenly returned the investment, several parts of the agreement needed to be changed. In addition to the funds allocated to her studio, the $200 million that had been invested in her studio should also belong to her. After he took over Shine, many companies related to real estate under the MO Corporation in High City would also be transferred to her name. Jean Wan might have signed the agreement without reading it. Although he was the one who made the divorce happen, he could not let her suffer losses in the future. Auntie Chin urged him to go back to his room to rest several times. Mr. Mo, when I accompanied Madam out of the hospital, she asked us to come back and help her pack up all her clothes and put them in her suitcase. She will send someone to pick them up in a few days. Auntie Chin sighed. And Madam also said that she probably won't come back to the Yew Garden. Mo Jingshan seemed not to hear her and still took a nap on the sofa in the hall on the first floor of the Yew Garden. At 1:00 in the morning, his cell phone suddenly vibrated. It was a call from Jean Wan. Mo Jingshan did not sleep much. He leaned against the sofa and picked up the phone. Jean Wan was probably standing outside. It was very windy in High City tonight. The wind whistled into his ears from the other side of the phone, sending chills down his spine. The night was as cold as water. It was as cold as her voice. Mo Jingshan, I'm not returning to the Yew Garden. You don't have to wait for me. Sleep early. Mo Jingshan subconsciously sat up on the sofa, asking in a heavy voice, are you not coming back today, or never? Jean Wan chuckled, her voice calm. I've even asked Auntie Chin to pack up my clothes. Isn't the answer obvious? You know, I'm a person who either doesn't let go, or once I do, I'll never look back. Mo Jingshan did not speak for a moment. He didn't get to ask her about her plans after the divorce. Whether it was a merciless dagger or an unnecessary concern, she blocked all of them before they could be unsheathed. Jean Wan was indeed such a person. When she was persistent, she had the courage to cut off all means of retreat. But when she completely gave up, she learned his decisiveness. She knew how to strike first and leave first. That was good too. At least he had taught her something. Mo Jingshan was silent for a long time and finally said, that's good too. I still have things to do, so I can't talk to you anymore. Mo Jingshan, let's go our separate ways. Jean Wan said and was about to hang up. Before she hung up, Mo Jingshan said, the divorce agreement needs to be amended. When you come back and sign it again, you can talk to me about going our separate ways. The woman's voice on the other end of the phone was very light. I don't want anything. I've caused you so much trouble in the past. Now that it's time to say goodbye, I have to pay you back. I've already paid back all your investments. As for the rest, thank you for laying the foundation for me. In the future, I'll be working alone. Time is as precious as money to me, so if there's nothing else, I'll go ahead. Mo Jingshan, your studio is already doing very well. You don't have to work too hard. Jean Wan did not speak for a moment and paused. He heard her breathing on the other end of the phone. It was very light and very low, mixed with the sound of the cool wind. Mo Jingshan, I know you're still you. You'll always be you. From the beginning, she clearly knew that he would always be him. Even if he knew about her embarrassing past 10 years, he never left, nor did he die in that car accident. Mo Jingshan was silent for a moment before lightly spitting out 2 words, is that so? Jean Wan said in a voice as soft as when she was by his side, it's late. I won't disturb you anymore. Goodbye. Mo Jingshan, all right. The phone was immediately hung up. Everything was quiet. The day after Jean Wan sent the signed divorce agreement to Mo Jingshan, the Yew Garden was closed, no one could enter, and all the servants were dismissed overnight. Auntie Chin received a large sum of money. She was an old servant of the Mo family. Logically speaking, after leaving the Yew Garden, she should directly return to the Mo family, but she really felt guilty to grandfather Mo. She was afraid that he would be too shocked to face the news of their divorce. Moreover, because Mr. Mo did not intend to let her return to the Mo family, she planned to return to her hometown. Before returning to her hometown, Auntie Chin went to Mo Nguyen's studio. At that time, Jean Nguyen was in a meeting with the people from England. After the meeting, she saw Auntie Chin waiting outside. Jean Nguyen personally received Auntie Chin, but Auntie Chin did not even sit down or drink tea. She just looked at Jean Nguyen, who was dressed in a professional suit and had a ruddy complexion as if she had not been hurt at all. After looking at her for a long time, she said, "Mr. Mo has closed the garden. Now no one can enter." "I know. I heard." Auntie Chin originally thought she just came to see Jean Nguyen. After all, after returning to her hometown, she did not know if she would have a chance to see her again. However, seeing Jean Nguyen's calm expression, her eyes immediately turned red. "That night, after you spoke to Mr. Mo on the phone, Mr. Mo directly smashed the phone." Jean Nguyen did not speak. That night, none of us dared to go out of the room, but no one could sleep, because Mr. Mo smashed everything that could be seen in the garden. The next day, he ordered people to clean up the mess on the ground. The entire garden was empty, and there was nothing left. Jean Nguyen's face was expressionless. She gently blew on the tea in the cup and still did not respond. Mrs. Mo. Chapter 4:18. The garden was dismissed, and Auntie Chin returned to her hometown. Elder Mo finally realized what had happened. Xiao Ba said that Elder Mo came to the entrance of the studio building early in the morning and said he wanted to see Jean Nguyen. Ever since Jean Nguyen met Auntie Chin, she knew that she couldn't see anyone. Things had already reached a certain point, and she couldn't make things worse. Especially Grandfather Mo, she couldn't see him. The news that Jean Nguyen refused to see Elder Mo spread, but Elder Mo stubbornly refused to leave. The weather was still hot in the morning, but in the afternoon, it suddenly rained heavily. Xia Tian understood why Jean Nguyen refused to see Elder Mo. She and Xiao Ba held an umbrella to shield Elder Mo from the rain. Even when it was dark, Elder Mo was still standing there waiting. However, Jean Nguyen asked someone to send down an exquisite velvet box. In the box was the round blue diamond she had always kept in the office drawer. Seeing that she had asked someone to send the blue diamond out, Elder Mo finally left, but he didn't take the blue diamond with him. He asked them to send it back to her. Elder Mo only left her one sentence: "This old man, I will live well and live to a ripe old age. I will live until the day G. Brat is willing to see me. I will guard the position of our Mo family's granddaughter-in-law for you. No one can take it away." Jean Nguyen didn't want to see Elder Mo because she was afraid that she would lose control of her heart. However, even if she didn't see him, the words Elder Mo left her still made her completely defeated. That night, Jean Nguyen got drunk alone in the hotel. She didn't look for anyone. Xia Tian, Xiao Ba, and all her friends and colleagues didn't know where she was. She went to the supermarket alone to buy a lot of wine and called the supermarket staff to send more wine to her room. This was a hotel directly opposite Aolan International and the Mo Corporation building. It was very high and had a balcony. Wearing a long skirt, she sat on the balcony, feeling the cool breeze. Her skirt swayed back and forth, and her feet swayed back and forth. She sat under the night sky of High City, looking at the 18th floor of Aolan International in the distance, where the lights were not turned on all night. Then she seemed to inadvertently look at the top floor of Mo Corporation, where the lights were also not turned on tonight. She felt that many memories were replaying in her mind like a movie. However, after they were replayed one by one, she seemed to have forgotten most of them. He didn't know how much wine he had drunk on the balcony. When he felt that he might fall from the balcony if he continued to get drunk, he reluctantly climbed back to the bed in his room and drank alone against the white wall until late at night. She didn't even know how drunk she was after that. She only knew that she was so drunk that she fell asleep. She didn't know how long she had been drunk or how long she had slept. Halfway through, Jean Wan received Xia Tian's call. When Xia Tian heard that she was drinking, she asked where she was and didn't call her again, considerately giving her some time to be alone. After waking up, she continued to drink. Jean Wan didn't eat anything and relied on wine to survive. When she couldn't drink anymore and felt sick to the point of vomiting, she finally threw the wine into the garbage bag and lay on the bed to sleep. When she finally woke up completely, it was the morning of the third day. Jean Wan opened her eyes and looked at the fluttering curtains and the sun hanging high in the east outside the window. She got up, walked to the balcony, and looked downstairs at everyone who got up early in the morning to rush to work. She looked at all kinds of people in the world. After staring at it for a long time, she came to her senses and returned to her room. She threw all the bottles of wine out of the room and went to take a shower. She brushed her teeth and washed herself from head to toe. After the smell of the wine had disappeared, she changed into clean and comfortable clothes and walked out. After carrying her bag and leaving the hotel, she passed by a hair salon. Jean Wan entered and cut her waist-length hair into a shoulder-length, medium-short haircut. As she left the salon, Jean Wan tossed her hair and recalled what Feng Ling had said. After cutting her hair short, it was indeed very comfortable. She didn't care about the 3,000 strands of worry. What was important was that it was really relaxing. She went to a nearby vegetarian restaurant to have a full breakfast and then returned to the studio to resume her normal work and life. A week later, Mr. Zan specially came from England to discuss the joint venture. Mr. Vince of BGY Group was still interested in her and hoped to persuade her to give up the idea of going to England. However, Jean Wan still signed a contract with England. Once it was signed, she would probably develop in England for 2 to 3 years after leaving Haiqing. Xia Tian would temporarily take over as the person in charge of Mo Nwan Studio. However, Xia Tian insisted that she was only managing. If Jean Wan dared to not return after 3 years, she would directly take the people from the finance department and leave. At that time, not only would she lose the studio, but her best friend would also run away. She wanted to see where she could go to cry in the future. Anyway, Xia Tian did indeed threaten her like this. After that, there were various preparations for staying in England for a long time. In the end, only Xiao Ba and a few interns who hoped to receive various work training opportunities decided to follow Jean Wan to England. Xia Tian would bring a group of veterans from the studio to oversee Mo Nwan Studio in Haiqing. All these arrangements were settled. These 3 years, you really don't plan on coming back? The day before they left for England, the group of colleagues in the studio gathered for another meal. Jean Wan was on her period tonight, so she did not drink. Xia Tian asked for a hot water bag from someone in the restaurant and handed it to her. She then watched as Jean Wan pressed the hot water bag against her stomach and sat by her side. She casually asked, "If Mr. Zand is willing to let me return, I will definitely come back. However, if the development there is too busy every day and I really can't leave, I can't guarantee that I won't be able to return," Jean Wan said. "You're leaving tomorrow. Even now, you don't plan on meeting Imo Jingshan to say goodbye. There's nothing to say goodbye to." Jean Wan's expression was calm and indifferent. Everything that needed to be said had already been said. After signing the divorce agreement, Jean Wan did not see Mo Jingshan again. Indeed, there was no need to see him. She only vaguely heard that Shine Group was about to make a big move. Mo Xiaozi frequently traveled between Haiqing and Los Angeles. The Western financial world and the Chinese business world were all discussing whether Shine was really going to change owners. They wondered if Mo Jingshan, who was already a dark horse in the country, was going to take over Shine Group. Chapter 419. Jean Wan bought an apartment of more than 200 square meters near the studio building and placed all her belongings in it. After all, there were too many clothes and various items. She couldn't bring so many things with her. It was already late. After Jean Wan packed her luggage, she sat on the carpet and looked at the blue diamond in her hand. It was as though she could still remember every time Mo Jingshan held her hand, the occasional pause when his slender knuckles stroked her ring finger. He had never placed any restrictions on her. He didn't even force her to wear a wedding ring. However, he had always helped her find the best things in the world. For example, this blue diamond. Whether it was made into a precious blue diamond pendant or a blue diamond ring, it was the most precious piece of jewelry in the world. He chose a blue diamond for her and left it up to her to decide what to do with it and how to make it. Just like now, they had let go of each other. He gave her a free world and let her create her future life as she pleased. He would no longer participate in it. Jean Wan put the blue diamond back into the velvet box and left the box in this apartment without taking it with her. The second week after Jean Wan left for England, she heard that Mo Jingshan had also left High City for Los Angeles. Jean Wan never saw him again, nor did she contact him again. For a long period of time, because the people around her had little contact with America and High City, she did not hear any news about Mo Jingshan. She also did not take the initiative to investigate or ask about him. However, later, she heard that Mo Shaozi was struck down by pressure from various Chinese enterprises and that Shine Group's stock market almost collapsed. Several months later, America's Shine Group's new CEO took over. At that time, Jean Wan was busy with the joint venture in London. Every day, she was tortured by Mr. Zhan's business methods and often worked late at night. She did not even have time to rest and did not have the energy to care about other things. From the very beginning, High City's Mo Wan studio had taken the right path because it had identified the domestic business opportunities and had been developing well. In this way, the various funds obtained from the studio could support Jean Wan's partner company. Mr. Zhan was also a very shrewd financier and businessman. He taught Jean Wan how to use these funds to pave the way step by step. After staying in England for a year, Jean Wan was doing very well. The company was successfully established, and Mr. Zhan felt that her Mo Wan studio could become the main business target of the company. Thus, the company name could not be changed. However, Jean Wan still removed the two words Mo Wan. In the end, the entire company was officially registered and changed to MN. After that, because the company set its sights on the internet industry, real estate industry, technology research and development industry, and mobile software development industry, these were all booming industries, it had more and more subsidiaries under its name. In the end, under the unstoppable trend, the MN Group was established. Mr. Zhan had many companies under his name that he had single-handedly supported. Thus, from the very beginning, it was agreed that on the day the company was formed, 49% of the shares would belong to Mr. Zhan. People like him who only relied on their brains to make a living had too many shares in their hands. He was also a shareholder of too many companies. Jean Wan was also very impressed by such a person. Mr. Zhan was already over 40 years old. Thus, from the very beginning, she had treated him as her teacher. Originally, they had agreed that 51% of the shares would belong to him. However, in the end, Mr. Zhan gave Jean Wan 2% and returned her the status of a shareholder. He held on to 49% of the shares and became a carefree immortal who had nothing to do and was waiting for money. With the status of a shareholder in Jean Wan's hands, she was naturally the one in charge of MN. All the responsibilities were placed on her. With the greatest responsibility, the greatest pressure, and the greater the motivation. Jean Wan's life became busier and busier. She was so busy that she could barely take care of herself. Furthermore, the company's development was not as smooth as it had initially been. In recent years, the momentum of the domestic and foreign real estate development industry and the mobile software industry was too strong. At the same time, there were too many similar products competing with each other. No matter how capable Jean Wan was, there would always be a day when someone would snatch her away. For example, the company had just invested several hundred million yuan to develop a few pieces of software to deal with the market. However, not long after it was developed, it would be imitated by others. Furthermore, the tallest tree in the forest would be destroyed by the wind. There would always be people trying to hinder MN Group's development. Even though the products were listed at the same time, those that belonged to MN Group would not be approved immediately, causing all the money invested to go down the drain. London was a place with heavy humidity all year round. When Jean Wan first arrived, she would have rashes all over her body. Her body that was afraid of cold and wet suffered a lot in the first half of the year. Later, in order to avoid skin inflammation, which she didn't know was caused by acclimatization or her delicate body, she began to give up on all short-sleeved clothes. Every day, she would either wear long sleeves or long skirts. She also tried to walk outdoors as little as possible. This way, the rashes on her body and face gradually improved. It was precisely because she dressed like this every day that her originally fair skin became even fairer and more tender. In the eyes of many tall British men, she was indescribably beautiful. Jean Wan had many suitors. Xiao Ba, who had always been by Jean Wan's side, completely understood Jean Wan's temper and had helped her reject many of them. Occasionally, when she encountered some difficult suitors, Jean Wan would personally deal with them. She would often display her true colors and make the other party speechless. By the second year in London, the originally thriving MN Group had fallen into an unprecedented financial impasse. Mr. Zand had accompanied her to pave the way for the early stage and was now busy advising other companies. He couldn't spare any attention to help Jean Wan. Furthermore, he believed that Jean Wan was capable enough to tide through the difficulties and didn't need to rely on others' help. After that, MN Group staggered through a year-long financial crisis. However, it was temporarily overshadowed by many companies who had finally seen a business opportunity and completely copied their company's business model. The money they earned in the first year was greatly lost in the second year. At the end of the year, the little money they had left was completely emptied. In the short 2 years after the divorce, Jean Wan had tasted the taste of success, but she had also suffered the taste of failure. Chapter 420. Jean Wan's MN Group fell into a financial crisis, but Shine Group in the United States was saved by Mo Jingshan's shrewd decision, and Shine Group flourished in Mo Jingshan's hands. In the past 2 years, Jean Wan had been in good health. Her complexion had become ruddy, and her overall health index had been rising. However, in the past 6 months, she had lost a lot of weight because of the financial crisis and all kinds of pressure. She didn't eat on time, but lived a regular life that even she found incredible. But she was under too much pressure and had too many things to do. Even if she often slept to catch up on sleep when she was not busy, the pressure of day after day still hovered over her head. Carrying a multinational group was not as simple as carrying a small studio. The studio could be sold at any time and announced its closure at any time, but a large multinational group was involved in many aspects, and everything was not so easy. In the office building of MN Group in London, many employees had been laid off. The company building, which had been lively last year, was especially deserted this year, but it was precisely because of this that the people who stayed were very busy. Once they were busy, they had no time to be sentimental about the departure of their old friends. Only Jean Wan occasionally stared at the empty seats in a daze after the meeting. Those empty seats were the directors and managers of several departments who had resigned and left because they no longer thought highly of MN Group. This was the reality of society. When you won, others would crowd around you, but when you looked like you were about to lose, some people would decisively leave before everything became a foregone conclusion. Their gazes would also quickly turn elsewhere, no longer as eager as they used to be. On the left side of the conference room was a huge circular floor-to-ceiling window, facing the direction of China. From afar, across the mountains and rivers of the earth, it seemed that the blooming flowers of High City at this time could be seen. Sometimes when Jean Wan returned from work and lived in the same apartment as Xiao Ba, she would always go over to see Xiao Ba and Xia Tian's video chat, but she didn't take the initiative to send a video chat. What on earth had changed in 2 years? A year ago, things like Weibo became popular in the country, and the number of communication software on mobile phones increased day by day. Some of the software was first developed by M&A Company, but in the end, it was copied by others, and after a simple modification, it became the most popular software. Jean Wan sat in the condo, looking at the day and calculating the time, and suddenly smiled. Time really flies. In a few months, even WeChat will be released. An era was coming, and an era was silently being suppressed. Little by little, time seemed to overlap with the world she once lived in. Everything seemed to have returned to its original point. The only difference was the difference of 10 years and 2 years. The other difference was that she was no longer the homeless Jean Wan who had lost everything. But what did she have now? The Ji family didn't go bankrupt, and Ji Hongwen was still living peacefully, but since she learned about her birth, she still kept in touch with her family, but she still remembered many rules that she shouldn't break, so she didn't even know where her home was. The studio was now officially under the name of MN Group, and Xia Tian was in charge of it in High City. Jean Wan didn't want to go back and disturb Xia Tian's life, nor did she want to put a lot of pressure on the company in High City, so as long as she had flexible funds, she would give priority to the studio. There was no blood relationship with the Ji family, so she had no real family. Her friends were thousands of miles away from her, and her marriage had ended 2 years ago. Everything was as Mo Jingxin said when he woke up in Los Angeles after sleeping for 2 months. The trajectory of life shouldn't be reversed, and everything should return to its original point. Xiao Ba had a boyfriend in the company. He was a foreign student. Although he was 1 year younger than Xiao Ba, he was very manly and reliable. The two of them loved each other and began to live together after a few months. Jean Wan gave up her previous apartment to them and moved to a smaller apartment near the company for the time being. She had a villa in England. When she first came here, Mr. Zand arranged a place for her to live, but it was too far from the company. She only went back to live a few times and didn't go back. The apartment she used to live in with Xiao Ba was also near the company. Now that she came out to live alone, she was closer to the company. Now that Jean Wan lived alone, she rarely went out to eat, and rarely ordered takeout. She often passed by the supermarket below the apartment to buy vegetables and various ingredients. The owner of the supermarket was a Chinese woman, which made her feel as though she wasn't abroad and slightly felt like she had returned home. People here were used to buying groceries by credit card. Once, Jean Wan saw a tall man holding his wife in his arms and buying very few things in the supermarket, but when he took out a black card and handed it to the boss of the supermarket, she stood there and stared blankly at him. From then on, Jean Wan found that she could always see the loving foreign couple shopping. Later, she deliberately avoided meeting them so that she wouldn't be dazed for a moment every time. What was there to be dazed about? She hadn't heard any news about Mo Jingxin for a long time. It was as though he had completely disappeared from her world. There was no trace of him. When she heard news about Mo Jingxin again, it was about a new international achievement of the American Shine Group. The internet industry was popular both at home and abroad, and a new industry was developed and led by Shine Group. Companies all over the world who had worked with Shine Group congratulated them. Although MN Group and Shine Group didn't have much contact, some of their partners were related. From the perspective of a fellow Chinese company, or from the perspective of an old acquaintance, perhaps Jean Wan should congratulate them, but she also knew that such an achievement wasn't surprising to him at all. In the future, Shine Group would have countless epic achievements, all of which were made possible by Mo Jingshan after he took over Shine. She usually calmly restrained her emotions, but occasionally had to drink at social events. After getting drunk, she couldn't help thinking, what was Mo Jingshan doing now? Would he be annoyed or even annoyed by the increasingly frequent fawning on Shine Group? Was everything going well in his life? Chapter 421. She would think a lot and wonder if Mo Jingshan's cold and noble character would make Shine's partners uncomfortable. But no matter how she thought about it, she felt that she was worrying for nothing. She didn't even have time to worry about her own business, and now she had to worry about other people's business. Just by looking at Shine's glory in the past few years, she knew how simple it was in Mo Jingshan's hands. He was not like her, facing countless crises and risks. She didn't even know if MN Group could survive in her hands. When a person was not strong enough, he needed to be as smooth as her. If he was strong enough, he would be like Mo Jingshan. The only ones who needed to be smooth and slick were his subordinates, not him. Shine Group gradually became a legend among Chinese companies. On the other side, no matter how hard Jean Wan worked, MN Group was suppressed too much by its peers and failed to qualify for the Chinese company selection at the end of the year. She heard that people from Shine Group would come to participate in the selection conference this time. She didn't know who they were, but Jean Wan was not qualified to go. The end of the second year was spent in all kinds of failures. Now it was the beginning of another year, and Jean Wan started working like crazy. She was often busy in the company and personally participated in all the projects and departments. This year was the third year since MN Group was established in the UK. She couldn't lose, and she had to win. This time, she had learned a lesson from her previous mistakes. She kept all her new projects under wraps until the day they hit the market. She didn't expose all the explosive points, bit by bit. Not only did she attract the attention of consumers, but she also made it difficult for her competitors, who were eyeing her covetously, to see through her plans and projects. Even if they wanted to imitate her, they had to wait until her projects became popular. Otherwise, not only would they not be able to suppress the momentum of the MN Group, but they would also be rejected by the public. What was worth celebrating was that Jean Wan's path became more and more careful and steady. She hit all the initial sharpness and achieved great success. This year's spring had just passed, and MN Group received the Innovation Award from the Overseas Business Summit and investment funds from various parties. Regaining confidence, all the plans that had been put aside last year began to be carried out. In half a year, Jean Wan, as expected, recovered everything she had lost last year. Jean Wan focused on the development of MN Group this year. She didn't want to lose, so she asked all her employees to work hard together. Even Xiao Ba didn't have time to fall in love and stayed with Jean Wan in the company all day. Mr. Zand saw that Jean Wan actually had the ability to start from zero in the face of such pressure and difficulties. Seeing her current achievements, he happily invested the hundreds of millions of yuan he had earned from her in the first year into the company. He did not participate in the shares, and the shareholders still belonged to Jean Wan. This old fox invested money when it was profitable, and when it was losing, he withdrew his net. Now that he saw that MN Group was thriving, he came to invest again. But facing this old fox who had been in the financial world for many years, even though Jean Wan had seen through his tricks, she didn't refuse. After all, what she lacked now was investment. She didn't lose anything by dealing with this old fox. Instead, she learned more. In this third year, Jean Wan kept fighting for all the investments and opportunities. She was busy every day, and sometimes she was so busy that she didn't even have time to wash her hair. Several times, she wanted to cut her hair as short as Feng Ling's but was stopped by Xiao Ba. Time passed bit by bit, and Jin Wan's company grew little by little with her. Finally, in the third year after Jin Wan left High City, MN Group entered the top 10 Chinese enterprises in the world like a hot knife through butter. MN Group took over several of the most profitable industries, and every time, it was able to find the right business opportunity. It gradually began to do charity work, and the charity foundation under the name of MN Group also grew stronger day by day. 3 years after her divorce, Jin Wan entered the Forbes list as the world's highest-earning Chinese female entrepreneur under the age of 25. She immediately took the top spot. This year, Jin Wan stood at the peak of her career. When she saw Jin Wan's ranking on the Forbes list of female entrepreneurs, Xia Tian, who had been calm about Jin Wan's experiences over the years, called to congratulate her, and then asked her again and again when she planned to return to High City. Xia Tian made full use of her eloquence and talked to Jin Wan on the phone for an hour. She concluded that MN Group was now stable, and she could return to High City. After all, her home was in High City, and she could move the headquarters of MN Group back at any time. Many Chinese enterprises started their business abroad and then moved their headquarters back to China. This was not difficult, and it was up to Jin Wan when she decided to do it. Xiao Ba was more casual. She had worked hard with Jin Wan for several years and would go wherever Jin Wan was. In the end, Jin Wan just said she would think about it and didn't continue the topic. Jin Wan heard 3 pieces of news recently. One piece of news was that Shu Yan had actually gotten married half a year ago. She was married to a foreign entrepreneur. It was said that he was a man with the blood of 4 countries. After getting married, he lived in New York and had already quit all his jobs at Shine Group in Los Angeles. The other news was that major industries in China were about to be shaken. It was indeed a good time to move the headquarters of MN Group back to High City. High City was one of the largest cities in China. This kind of Sino-foreign joint venture would have better development prospects in China than in High City, and it would be more direct and convenient to respond to market changes. The third news was that Xia Tian was pregnant and was about to give birth, but she had been helping Jin Wan look after the studio in High City, which was the current subsidiary company, and hadn't told Jin Wan about her pregnancy. Recently, she had been urging Jin Wan to go back because she was afraid that one day she couldn't hold on and would directly go into the delivery room. After giving birth, she couldn't help Jin Wan for the time being. For a moment, she didn't know whether to arrange for someone else to take over or to call Jin Wan back. Xia Tian and Jin Wan were the same age, so it was not strange that she was pregnant now. But what Jin Wan couldn't understand was that Xia Tian and her criminal police captain boyfriend hadn't even held a wedding yet, right? Could it be that this woman was courting death by quarreling with her boyfriend and then hiding the fact that she was pregnant? It was said that the criminal police captain had been busy chasing down drug dealers for the past year and hadn't returned to High City for a long time. At the thought of Xia Tian lying alone in the delivery room when she was really going to give birth one day without even a signature, and she had been cut off from her family for so many years and had always been alone. Chapter 422. On the international flight from London to High City, the cabin was closed, and all the passengers had boarded. The sunlight outside the window was too dazzling. Jin Wan put on her sunglasses, closed her eyes, and ignored the people in the other seats. However, there were only 2 people in the first-class cabin today. A man sitting on the other side didn't sit down until Jin Wan closed her eyes. The man was originally sitting on the other side, but when he caught a glimpse of Jin Wan, he immediately asked to change to the seat next to her. Now there were only the 2 of them in the first-class cabin, and the flight attendant certainly wouldn't refuse such a request. When the man sat down next to Jean Wan, he saw that she didn't like the sunlight, so he directly closed the small window. Jean Wan sensed something, opened her eyes, glanced to the side, and was about to close them again when she suddenly paused, took off the sunglasses on her face, and looked at the man sitting next to her. "Hi." The man greeted her. Jean Wan looked at him for a while and then said, "Shenmu." Shenmu smiled and held back the words Mrs. Imo that were on the tip of his tongue. He hesitated before saying, "Miss Ji, are you going back to China?" Jean Wan didn't expect to meet Shenmu in such a place, but she wasn't surprised. She just looked at him and said, "Yes, I'm going back." What a coincidence. "I went to London on a business trip a few days ago and was about to return today. I didn't expect to meet you here. Some time ago, I heard that MN Group was going to move its headquarters back to China, but I didn't hear much about it. I didn't expect it to be true." Jean Wan didn't speak, which was a tacit agreement. Shenmu had always been a man of few words, but perhaps because they hadn't seen each other for several years, he rarely spoke warmly as if they were old acquaintances. "Miss Ji, you've appeared in the news a lot these years. This year, you even made the Forbes list of female entrepreneurs. I didn't expect you to become so powerful in just a few years. In the past, many people didn't think highly of you when you were in the real estate industry, but now the real estate industry has been soaring, and your income is really amazing. This year, most of the companies in the real estate industry are winners. I have to say, Miss Ji, you really have foresight." As a young female representative of Chinese enterprises in the past 2 years, Jean Wan's name had already spread far and wide. Several flight attendants at the airport heard their conversation and couldn't help but look at her. On these foreign airlines, most of the flight attendants were young men. Those people looked at Jean Wan, only to see that Jean Wan did not move, as if she did not hear Shenmu's words. She just sat there quietly, listening, without any response, nor did she smile politely. She was clearly a very young woman, but she looked calm and peaceful, and in such silence, revealed a mature charm beyond her age. Even Shenmu found that Jean Wan had changed a lot in just a few years. Every pore on her body exuded an eye-catching temperament. She used to have an extraordinary reputation for her beauty in High City, and after years of honing and settling in the business world, she looked like she was born to be a socialite with the demeanor of a great family. However, Jean Wan just smiled at his words and then closed her eyes to rest. He didn't know if it was intentional or not, but she didn't say more to him, nor did she continue to respond to Shenmu. On the contrary, Shenmu still looked at Jean Wan from time to time, but Jean Wan treated him as if he was invisible and didn't respond. Even when they flew from England to China, Jean Wan didn't take the initiative to communicate with Shenmu. Shenmu felt a little wronged. It was CEO Mo who divorced her, not him. Although he had been working for CEO Mo, Miss Ji's completely indifferent attitude was really cold. The flight attendant reminded them that they would land in High City in half an hour. Shenmu tactfully returned to his original seat and sat down. Seeing that he didn't know when he would see Jean Wan again after getting off the plane, he thought about it and sat down next to her. "Will there be a car to pick you up after you get off the plane? If there isn't, do you need me to drive you back? My car is at the airport. I changed my flight at the last minute and haven't informed them. I don't think there will be anyone to pick me up," Jean Wan replied and glanced at him. At the same time, she took a look at him. "Didn't you go to the United States to work for Shine these years? The MO Corporation has merged into the Shine Group's China branch. You're no longer working in High City. Why is your car at the airport? Miss Ji, don't you know?" Shenmu asked with a smile. Jean Wan glanced at him indifferently. "Know what? I've been back in China with CEO Mo for more than 4 months. Shine Group subsidiaries around the world are in a stable financial condition. After CEO Mo took over, he personally screened many of Shine's managers. Now, even the person in charge of the headquarters in Los Angeles came with CEO Mo. They're all trustworthy right-hand men, and CEO Mo doesn't need to worry about them at all. Now, the focus of global economic development and consumption is in China, and Shine is going to focus on China for the next 3 years. Mo Jingshan had returned to China. This didn't make her feel too much. It only took her a moment to suppress her slight surprise, but she didn't expect that Mo Jingshan had returned to China. I went to London last week for a temporary assignment. My car is parked at the airport. If you don't have a car to pick you up, why don't you hitch a ride with me? Anyway, I'm going back to High City, and there's no one else in my car. It's not inconvenient. Nowadays, young, beautiful, and obviously rich girls like you had better not take a strange car. It's easy to get into trouble. Shenmu's following words faintly reached her ears. Jin Wan glanced at him and smiled, but still rejected him. No, I happen to have a frequent customer here after I get off the plane. I'll take their car back. I won't bother you. Shenmu's words were suddenly stuck in his throat. He thought for a while and said, CEO Mo may go to the company today. Don't you want to see him? However, when he said this, the plane landed. There was a loud sound of the plane's wheels landing, the sound of the plane sliding on the flat ground, and a series of announcements in English and Chinese from the cabin announcing that the plane had landed safely. There were so many noises around that he didn't know whether Jin Wan heard it or not, but she put on her sunglasses again at this moment and didn't respond. The author's words. Chapter 423. The sound of the huge rollers landing on the ground, the sound of the plane gliding on the flat ground, and the announcement of the safe landing in English and Chinese came from the cabin. There were so many noises around that he didn't know whether Jin Wan heard it or not, but at this moment, she put on her sunglasses again and didn't reply. The cabin door opened, and Jin Wan got up and left, not looking back again. Shenmu hesitated and got up to follow her, but he didn't expect that Jin Wan really had a client to meet at the airport. As soon as she walked into the airport lobby, a man about 30 years old came up to her with a smile. Jin Wan waved at the man. When she turned to pick up her suitcase, she saw Shenmu standing a few steps behind her. However, she only glanced at him and politely nodded her head at him before turning to leave. Shenmu was about to raise his hand and say, "Then I'll see you another day." However, Jin Wan didn't even give him a chance to speak and left. Shenmu's hand froze in the air and then he put it down awkwardly. In the past, Miss Ji was quite easygoing. Every time she went to the Mo Corporation, she would say hello and be very polite to him, which was a far cry from the attitude she had now when they were almost strangers. Seeing Jin Wan walking with the man in his 30s, who seemed to be talking and laughing, Shenmu couldn't help sighing and sighing. Without saying anything more, he walked out of the airport lobby. "A few days ago, I heard from CEO Xia that you were going to return to China. I thought it would take you at least a few months to prepare, but I didn't expect you to come back so soon." The man beside Jin Wan asked the secretary behind him to take her luggage, and then walked beside her, talking to her. "I didn't plan to come back so early. I'm used to it in the UK these years." Jin Wan smiled and said, "But Xia Tian is about to give birth. I can't still be carefree in the UK at this time. I have to come back and take over the business in High City, lest she can't even feel at ease when she gives birth." "Who said you lived a carefree life in the UK? People who don't know you only see the glory you have now, but how many people know what kind of life you have been living in the UK for the past 3 years?" Jin Wan smiled. "Everyone has to work hard. I haven't worked hard for a long time. If it weren't for you, Mr. Vince, who helped me deal with so many tricky contracts and resource disputes with various companies every time you were sent to the UK in the past 2 years, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to establish myself in this industry so quickly. Speaking of, I have a lot of benefactors. Mr. Zand, on one hand, Mr. Zand is my partner, and on the other hand, is my teacher. He has taught me a lot of business skills, and Mr. Vince, you are my benefactors. What benefactors? Aren't you my confidant? The man walking beside her glanced at her meaningfully. The secretary following behind Mr. Vince was no longer the same one from 3 years ago. She had long noticed that Mr. Vince had been deliberately applying to be sent to the UK in the past few years. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell that every time Mr. Vince went to the UK, he would specially visit Jean Wan. However, although Jean Wan's relationship with Mr. Vince had gradually become closer, she seemed to have never seen Mr. Vince's repeated attempts to show goodwill. She only regarded him as a partner or friend, and for 3 years, she had never crossed the boundary of a friend. He really didn't know whether this Miss G's EQ was too low or she was too arrogant. How could she not be moved by him? Hearing the words confidant, Jean Wan just raised her eyebrows slightly, smiled, and looked at the weather outside the airport hall. The average temperature in High City in June is more than 30 degrees. I can feel the heat assaulting my face even before I walk out. Am I wearing too much? Mr. Vince didn't dwell on the topic just now. In the past few years, he had figured out Jean Wan's character. She devoted herself to her career and seemed to have almost disappeared. She was indifferent to things like men and relationships, but she didn't deliberately avoid them. It seemed that she was really not interested in them. Anyway, Jean Wan didn't have any troublesome suitors around her. Those who were too difficult to deal with had long been driven away by her. He didn't need to drive them away at all. He happened to be single for so many years and had long been used to getting along with Jean Wan like friends. She was not moved, and he was not in a hurry. The weather in London is too cold. It must have been a long time since you felt the sunshine in High City. You're indeed wearing too much. Do you want to change? I'll wait for you. Mr. Vince glanced at the long-sleeved blouse and jeans Jean Wan was wearing and turned back to signal his secretary to bring Jean Wan's suitcase over. Why don't you go first? I'll call a taxi and go back after changing. Today, I'm flying from London to High City, and you're flying from Hong Kong to High City. It's just a coincidence that we met at the airport. Just now, I heard from Secretary Yang that you arrived at the airport 3 hours ago. If I had known, I wouldn't have kept you waiting. I'd be too embarrassed to keep Mr. Vince waiting. Jean Wan said as she took off her sunglasses and put them in her bag. She carried her suitcase and looked around for a bathroom. I don't have anything to do in the company this afternoon. How long will it take to change? I'll wait for you. Mr. Vince stood in place and pointed to the right 200 meters away. Over there. Jean Wan looked in the direction he pointed. There was indeed a bathroom. She nodded politely to Mr. Vince with a smile, turned around, and pushed her suitcase in that direction. More than 10 minutes later, Jean Wan came out of the bathroom after changing her clothes. Her light-striped blouse and jeans had been replaced by a bright red spaghetti-strap dress. Her shoulder-length hair was casually bunched up behind her head, revealing her snow-white neck and collarbone. She looked cool, casual, and not deliberately seductive. After changing her clothes, she was about to call Xia Tian because Xiao Ba and the others had returned to High City a few days earlier. She was about to call Xia Tian to tell her that she was safe, but when she looked up, she saw that Mr. Vince was still standing there, waiting for her patiently. Mr. Vince saw Jean Wan change from a distance and gave her a smile of praise and appreciation. After Jean Wan walked in, the secretary behind him took Jean Wan's luggage. Many passers-by couldn't help glancing at the beauty in the red dress. It was not uncommon to see such a beautiful and fair-skinned beauty, but the temperament of this beauty in the red dress was particularly eye-catching. The kind of beauty that was beautiful but not arrogant, glamorous but not conceited, and completely unrestrained and composed made many men look at her. Even Secretary Yang couldn't help glancing at Jean Wan. No wonder Mr. Vince, who didn't want to marry, could fall for Miss G. Chapter 424. It had been a year since she left the airport and returned to downtown High City. Jean Wan looked at the familiar buildings on the roadside. She didn't expect that 3 years had passed so quickly, but nothing in High City seemed to have changed. It was as if she had never left. "Are you sure you don't want me to send you back to your place?" Mr. Vince sat in the car and looked at Jean Wan, who had been quietly looking out of the window. "No, I'll go back to the company first. The new studio you moved to 3 years ago has become the old site. The new office building is not in the city center, but in the western part of the city, which is far away from where you used to live. Are you going to change your living place?" Jean Wan did intend to move after coming back. She didn't answer but looked out of the window. After a while, she said, "I'm not sure. I'll see. If you need anything, you can call me at any time. I've troubled you a lot when I was in London. Now that I'm back in High City, I have a lot of friends and relatives here. I'd better not trouble you, Mr. Vince. Now that I'm back, I just need to deal with some trifles. The rest will be handled by the people in the company. I don't need any help." Mr. Vince didn't insist. Seeing that Jean Wan was a little underdressed and the air conditioner in the car was too high, he sternly ordered, "Turn down the air conditioner." The secretary sitting in the front passenger seat hurriedly raised her hand and turned down half of the air conditioner. Jean Wan seemed not to hear it and acted as if it had nothing to do with her. She took a look at the time and said, "It will take at least 40 minutes to get to the West District from here. It's too far from your BGY company. I can get off here." "It's all right. I'll take you there first." Jean Wan couldn't persuade him, so she simply stopped talking, closed her eyes, leaned back in the seat, and no longer participated in any conversation. When they arrived at the West District, the Mercedes-Benz drove to the main entrance of the High City Company building of MN Group's China division. Mr. Vince was about to raise his hand to wake Jean Wan up, but the moment his hand touched her, Jean Wan had opened her eyes. The woman in the red dress had slept for 40 minutes, but the moment she opened her eyes, Mr. Vince could see that she hadn't slept at all. "Here we are. Thank you." She was about to get out of the car when Mr. Vince suddenly held her hand and put a velvet box in it. Jean Wan silently looked at the velvet box in her hand and then at him. "What is this?" "Consider it a gift for your return to China." Jean Wan gave a faint smile but didn't even open it. She put the box back into his hand. "Thank you for welcoming me back, but I can't accept the gift. It's just a bracelet." Mr. Vince looked at her clean and fair wrist. "You haven't worn any jewelry these years. It's just a bracelet. It doesn't have any special meaning." "What, you don't dare to accept it? It's useless to goad me. If this was a shell bracelet that you bought from a seaside holiday, Mr. Vince, I might have accepted it as a souvenir. But this is too expensive, and I have no reason to accept it." She didn't need to open it at all. Just by looking at the small logo on the box, she knew it was a top jewelry brand in the world. Any piece of silver or crystal jewelry cost more than 100,000 yuan. Even though both of them were rich, she couldn't accept a simple gift. Seeing that Jean Wan was so determined, Mr. Vince didn't say more and put the box on the seat with a faint smile. "All right, I won't force you. If you don't like it, I won't give it to you again." Knowing Mr. Vince's feelings for her, Jean Wan usually wouldn't allow a man who had improper thoughts about her to stay with her for too long or become her friend. Just as Xia Tian said, she seemed to have changed a lot, but the arrogant and unapproachable personality of a teenager was still hidden in her bones. She didn't have any tolerance for men she didn't like. All pursuers were pushed away by her as if they were garbage, and she wouldn't give them a chance at all. But Mr. Vince was too considerate. He was too gentlemanly and respected her. He knew when to advance and when to retreat, and he never did anything to embarrass her. As time went by, this man had appeared for a long time, and he did help her several times in London, so she couldn't push him away. Friend? Sort of. At this moment, Jean Wan's cell phone rang. Sorry, I have to take a call. Mr. Vince didn't speak. When Jean Wan answered the phone, he got out of the car and asked his secretary to bring her suitcase down. Then when he saw Jean Wan put down the phone after a few minutes, he opened the car door for her in a gentlemanly manner and said with a smile, "Miss G, please." Jean Wan put her cell phone back in her bag, nodded politely to Mr. Vince, and got out of the car, declining his request to send her back to the building. When their car drove away, Jean Wan walked into the office building with her suitcase. Although she hadn't been in High City for years, the security guards and staff at the gate recognized her as the president of the MN Group, so she walked unimpeded and no one dared to stop her. As soon as he entered, he saw two tall and fat men making a lot of noise at the front desk. They were smashing things and smashing cups. The two front desk ladies standing at the front desk were holding the landline and making a phone call nervously. Jean Wan glanced over there and heard one of the men who was smashing things say, "Ask the person in charge to come out. We bid for a piece of land first." How did it become your MN Group overnight? Relying on the fact that the MN Group has been doing well in the domestic real estate industry in the past 2 years, you even dare to rob our Hing Chang's land, don't you? You guys sure have guts. Sir, don't be impulsive. This building is so tall that it will take a while for a normal person to take the elevator down from the office. Besides, as you saw at the bidding meeting last time, our CEO Xia is pregnant. Even if she wants to go downstairs, she has to wait. Don't smash things. After putting down the phone, the receptionist looked at the two tall men in horror and nervousness. She didn't dare to stretch her hand forward, but she still spoke carefully, lest she really broke something. What's wrong with being pregnant? You can rob our Hing Chang's land just because you're pregnant. You've taken the net profit of that land. Do you think our boss doesn't make a living? How dare you rob the land we agreed on? Do you really think the real estate industry in High City belongs to your MN Group? Chapter 425. Tell that Xia woman to come down right now. If she doesn't come out to see us today, I'll dig the baby out of her belly. Let's see if she can keep pretending. Seeing that the two men were about to turn around and smash the huge blue and white porcelain vase next to them, the company's security guards had already rushed over. Although the blue and white porcelain was not touched by them, several people were tangled together, and the scene was chaotic. CEO G, you can go upstairs first. The staff member who had just led Jean Wan into the door felt a headache when he saw this scene. He stood by Jean Wan's side and whispered. What's going on? Do they often come here to make trouble? Jean Wan didn't enter the elevator but stood by the elevator door and looked in that direction. The staff member stood behind her and whispered, last month, the boss of Hing Ching Real Estate Company went to the government to get a piece of land for a new square. The government was about to bid for it, but this month, they suddenly accepted our bid. I don't know what they were thinking. They had already negotiated with Hing Ching, but they changed their mind halfway and put our bid in, so the project became our company. The boss of Hing Ching Real Estate Company is a tough guy. It said that he used to be a gangster, and even the government had to give in to him, but now the government put the blame on us, saying that we gave up enough profit. Now I don't know if there's any conflict between Hengqing and the government, but the person in charge of the bidding pushed our company out as a shield. With that, the staff member saw several more security guards coming in. Fearing that these people would bump into Jin Wan, he hurriedly pulled Jin Wan aside and whispered, "Our company has been in the limelight these years. It was just a branch company, but now it's said that the headquarters will be moved back. Many local real estate companies and technology companies in High City want to target us. CEO Xia didn't want to tell you about this, but I didn't expect that you would see this as soon as you came back." Hearing this, Jin Wan didn't speak and turned to look at the elevator. The number on the elevator went down from the top floor. It seemed that Xia Tian was about to come down. She glanced at the group of people who were twisting into a ball and said coldly, "Call the police first." Then, she was about to go over. However, the staff hurriedly pulled her back. "If we could have called the police, we would have done so long ago. These people have come to cause trouble several times. It's just that they were just threatening before and didn't really smash things. Who knew that they would actually come and smash things today? Their boss has some connections with the police. Even if you have connections, you should call the police first." "Do all the police stations in Haiqing have connections with them?" Jin Wan asked. The staff was stunned for a moment before nodding. "All right." Jin Wan coldly turned her eyes away and walked over. She walked into the crowd surrounded by security guards. Some of the security guards had seen Jin Wan in photos, and some didn't know her. Seeing such a young and beautiful lady suddenly coming in, some of them hurriedly raised their hands to stop her. Jin Wan pushed them away and looked coldly at the two strong men who had just pressed 3 or 4 security guards to the ground. "I'm in charge of this place. If you have any problem, just say it. Do you smash things to show that you are not to be trifled with, or do you just want others to see your ugly, rabid behavior?" The two men immediately glanced at her fiercely. They thought they would see Xia Tian, the pregnant woman, but they didn't expect it to be a beautiful woman in a red dress with a perfect figure. They immediately snorted coldly, pushed away the arm of a security guard who had just been twisted, stood up, and walked over. The two men were at least 1.9 meters tall. The moment they stood up, the people around them subconsciously took a step back. Jin Wan stood still and looked at the two men calmly and coldly. They stood in front of her and looked her up and down for a long time with fierce faces, but the woman in front of them was not inferior to them at all. One of the men suddenly sneered, reached out to pinch her chin, and reached out to her in a very disrespectful gesture and movement. But before his hand touched her chin, Jin Wan still didn't move and said in a low and indifferent voice, "Since the government chose to give that land to MN Group, it means that your company has lost the negotiation with the government. Hengqing Company was abandoned by MN Group and lost the first round. What you should do now is to go to the government to find out the truth and find a way to protect yourself instead of smashing things here. You can smash things here, but I'm afraid you can't afford the price." The tall man who had just raised his hand paused. For a moment, he didn't seem to understand what Jin Wan meant, but her fearless aura made the two men look at her up and down in confusion, as if to determine if she was really in charge of this place. Wasn't it said that the person in charge of High City MN Group was Xia Tian? Where did this woman come from? That's right. It's obvious that you're not strong enough and only want to get benefits. You went to the government, but in the end, you still failed to get this piece of land. Instead of thinking about the problem, you came directly to MN to make trouble. Does the boss of Hengqing really think that our MN Group is isolated and helpless in High City with only me, a big belly, in charge? Does he think he can step on us easily? Outside the crowd, Xia Tian, who claimed to be a pregnant woman, came over in a loose summer dress with a round belly. Although her belly was already very big, she didn't lose to others at all and even looked fiercer than Jin Wan. The two men took another look at Xia Tian and looked back and forth between Xia Tian and Jin Wan. One of them said angrily, "Which one of you is in charge here? You're as stupid as asking the parents of a child who is the legal guardian. Are you blind or are you too ignorant to know that you don't even know CEO G of MN Group? How on earth do you survive in the real estate industry?" Xia Tian walked into the crowd and ignored the two men's fierce looks disapprovingly. She just leaned over to Jin Wan and whispered, "You've just come back, and you've already encountered such a disgusting thing. It's really embarrassing for me." Chapter 426. Xia Tian patted her belly gently as if she was touching a watermelon. Then she said calmly, "Isn't it obvious? There's no need to explain." Seeing Xia Tian's willing expression, it proved that this was indeed the crystallization of love and not the result of the previous life. Jin Wan's heart that had been hanging by a thread finally relaxed. Now was not the time to ask these questions. Jin Wan withdrew her gaze and looked at the two men. "From now on, if you have any problems, just tell me. Ms. Xia has helped me manage the affairs of High City for the past few years. Now she is about to give birth. Even if you want to make trouble, you don't have to target a pregnant woman who is about to give birth. If she is frightened by you and something happens to her, can you afford it?" The two men didn't take the pregnant woman seriously at all, but since Jin Wan had said so, they didn't want to get into trouble. They just said fiercely, "Don't King play with the pregnant woman. How dare you snatch Hing Cheng's land? You should give us an explanation or fall out with us. Are you going to fight against Hing Cheng in High City in the future? If you really have the guts, our boss doesn't mind." Xia Tian frowned and was about to speak because of their harsh words, when Jin Wan raised her hand and stopped her. She looked back and said, "Let CEO Xia go up first." Jin Wan. Xia Tian turned to look at her and said in a low voice, "The people of Hengqing are not to be trifled with. You have just returned to China. You don't know how many new real estate companies have been established in China in the past 3 years, and there are many in High City alone. The boss of Hengqing is not to be trifled with. I know. You go up first." Jin Wan gave her a reassuring look. How could Xia Tian be reassured? Although Jin Wan had experienced many twists and turns abroad in recent years, High City, a prosperous metropolis, was not much simpler than her international business struggles. She had just returned and probably didn't know the situation of the various companies in High City. Xia Tian wanted to say something, but after all, Jin Wan was back. Everyone could see who was the boss, and Xia Tian's current situation was really not suitable for such an atmosphere. Without saying a word, several staff members dragged her out. "Hey, you guys, don't pull me, damn it, as soon as Jin Wan comes back, I'm not your boss anymore, am I? You actually don't listen to me. I still have things to say to her. Don't pull me." When Xia Tian's voice was far away, Jin Wan said mildly, "If you have anything to say, come into my office." The two men immediately looked at Jin Wan's white and tender face with mocking smiles and raised their hands to touch it, saying, "Go to the office. The two of us and you." Their tone was disgusting, but Jin Wan remained calm. When the man's hand was about to touch her, before the man could see what was going on, his wrist was suddenly gripped hard by Jin Wan. With a slight twist, his wrist made a crisp sound. If Jin Wan used a little more strength, his wrist would be dislocated. The two men looked at her in shock. Jin Wan clasped one of their wrists. Seeing that the man in front of her turned pale because of the pain, she gave a lukewarm smile and said flatly, "Behave yourself in public. Hengqing is a famous company in High City. You can make trouble, but if you do anything else disgusting, I won't take any responsibility if your company's image can't be salvaged." Not only the two tall and strong men, but also the staff and security guards around them didn't expect that Jean Wan, who looked slender, could react so quickly and seemed to be good at martial arts. I didn't expect you to be so good at martial arts. The man whose wrist was gripped by Jean Wan was about to pull his hand out, but as soon as he moved, he felt so much pain that he couldn't exert any strength in his arm. He looked incredulously at Jean Wan, who seemed to be very relaxed and didn't use much strength at all. Seeing this, the other man was afraid of losing face in front of such a woman and was about to reach out to help, but Jean Wan said coldly, "If you want to break his arm, you can do it." The two men froze on the spot. Hearing the noise, Xiao Ba had come downstairs and entered the crowd. When she saw this scene, her eyelids twitched, and she rushed behind Jean Wan and said loudly, "Don't underestimate women. Our CEOG has learned martial arts from internationally award-winning martial artists. Your brute force can't even compare to the strength of a real human body's bones and acupoints. Believe it or not, if you dare to make trouble here, our CEOG will break the bones in both of your arms." As Xiao Ba spoke, Jean Wan exerted a little more strength in her hand. In fact, she only exerted a little strength, but it was enough to make the man feel as if the tendons in his arm were about to break. Hearing this, the two men's arrogance was greatly reduced, but they still looked at Jean Wan discontentedly and even fiercely. You let go of me first. Do you still want to touch me?" Jean Wan asked coldly. It wasn't until the man was forced to sweat by the pain in his arm that he finally compromised and said vaguely, "Let go of me. Let's talk." Jean Wan let go of him. Seeing the woman in a red dress put down her hand so effortlessly, the two men more or less believed what Xiao Ba said when she rushed over. Did this woman really know how to break people's bones? When Jean Wan coldly turned around and was about to walk out of the crowd, Xiao Ba quietly gave Jean Wan a look, and Jean Wan glanced at her calmly. The look was incomprehensible to others, but to the two of them, it seemed that they hit it off. How could she be as good as Xiao Ba said? But in the last year in London, Feng Ling went to England and stayed with Jean Wan for another year. During this period, Jean Wan was robbed by several foreigners after working overtime in the company at night. Although she didn't suffer any substantial harm, she began to learn some self-defense skills that day. So Feng Ling took some time out of Jean Wan's gym time every day. At first, she taught her some simple self-defense skills. Later, she found that Jean Wan was very willing to learn and had a good understanding, so Feng Ling designed a set of self-defense skills suitable for Jean Wan who had not undergone special physical training. She didn't need to use too much strength. She just needed to remember the most vulnerable parts of each person, remember every crack and vulnerable point of the human bones, and then combine them with the basic self-defense skills Feng Ling taught her. Chapter 427. Although Jean Wan was a good student, as Feng Ling said, she hadn't undergone rigorous physical training, so she was still weak in strength. She could only win with her wits. She could only bluff them temporarily with her little tricks. As long as the other party was scared, her tricks would work. But if the other party really wanted to beat her, she couldn't beat these two strong men. After all, they were both strong and tall, and she wasn't an iron wall. How could she beat them? But Xiao Ba was very smart and cooperated with her. With a few words, she successfully bluffed the two men. Maybe because Jean Wan had just come back from the UK, these people only knew that she was internationally famous this year and was on the Forbes list, but they didn't know her real strength. Jean Wan took the two men to her office, asked them carefully about the whole thing, and called the person in charge of the government to get a general idea of the matter. It turned out that the person in charge of the government had taken some benefits from Hengqin Company, but the higher-ups found out. On the day of the bidding, a big leader happened to be present, so they didn't dare to be too obvious, so they put the bidding documents of several big companies together. In the end, the big leader decided that MN Group would be in charge of the project. Later, when the people of Enchanting Company went to question them, they said that MN Group offered more profits and was more tempting. Although the other party didn't understand, their purpose was very simple. They wanted to use MN Group as a shield. After Jean Wan figured out the cause and effect, she couldn't defend the people in charge of the government, so she couldn't tell them the reason directly but had to solve the problem with the people of Enchanting Company in a roundabout way. Just when the two men were about to call their boss over, the police finally came late. The people of Enchanting Company did have something to do with the police. They just went through the motions and came in to make some statements. Before the problem was solved, they took the man away and let him go. That was the end of the matter for the time being. Although MN Group was indignant when they learned that the police released them after taking them away, no one dared to say anything. After all, the police on the west side of the city did have dealings with Enchanting Company. This was the way of the world, unless you had a stronger backer. The problem seemed to have been solved, but the contradiction between Enchanting Company and MN Group was still a dead knot, and Jean Wan had to find a way to untie it. Although there were some conflicts between many real estate companies in China, this type of conflict could easily snowball into a bigger and bigger one. In the office, Xia Tian pushed open the door with a big belly and looked at Jean Wan, who was sitting behind the desk. I shouldn't have let them leave so easily just now. Didn't they say they were going to dig out the child in my stomach? I want to see if they have the guts to dig it out. Xia Tian walked in angrily. Clearly, she had not calmed down yet. Jean Wan glanced at her and then at her belly. How many months has it been? Xia Tian was quiet for a moment before saying, 8 months. Is she really going to give birth soon? Who on earth leaked the news to you? I've been hiding my pregnancy from you. Who dares to tell you? Why didn't you tell me? Are you going to come back to work as soon as you get out of the delivery bed? Jean Wan glanced at her coldly, turned on the computer, and typed on the keyboard. You'll take an official leave from today until the child is 1 year old. I haven't given birth yet. Why are you in such a hurry? Xia Tian came over, her round belly sticking out in front of her. Then she bent down, put her hands on the table, and looked at Jean Wan with a smile. Did you take a rejuvenation pill in the past 3 years in the UK? You're already 24 or 25, but your face and skin are still like that of a high school student. Have you gone against your growth? Jean Wan ignored her and continued to look at the report on the computer. As she read, she said, "Give me the things you have now and go back to take maternity leave." Seeing her so focused on work, Xia Tian put her hand behind her waist, held her belly, and paced back and forth, saying, "You've just come back. I have to hand over the work to you for a few days. Let's talk about it in a few days. Anyway, as long as you're here, it's okay for me to do odd jobs and occasionally help you look at the documents." Okay. Jean Wan closed the report page on the computer, let go of the mouse, leaned back in the chair, and looked lightly at Xia Tian's belly. I didn't see you hold a wedding, but your belly is already so big. Is the baby legally born? Have you gotten the marriage certificate? The corner of Xia Tian's mouth twitched. Yes. When? It's our little criminal police officer. He dragged me to the hospital when he saw me vomiting in the morning. When he found out that I was pregnant, he took me to get a marriage certificate without any hesitation. He even used his connections in various agencies to transfer my household registration that I couldn't steal from my home in S City. Then, he directly got a marriage certificate. Jean Wan raised her eyebrows. You used to call me a blockhead, smelly and stubborn, but now you've become a little criminal policeman? Xia Tian didn't explain but just touched her belly and said, in fact, he wanted to hold a wedding, but as soon as he got the marriage certificate, he he suddenly had a drug arrest mission and was away for more than half a year. Before I could react from a young girl to a young married woman, I became a huge husband watching rock in High City overnight. Alas, I really regret it. I shouldn't have impulsively gone to get the marriage certificate with him. Clearly, Xia Tian's face was so sweet that honey was almost dripping out of it, but she was still sighing and saying that she was a husband-gazing stone. Jean Wan was expressionless. In fact, if you want to get a divorce, it's not difficult. Speaking of divorce, I have some experience. Do you need me to teach you? Xia Tian gave her a sideways glance. If I get a divorce, will you be the father of my child? Jean Wan smiled. Sure. Xia Tian rolled her eyes. Don't ruin the flowers of the motherland. If my child can't tell the difference between a man and a woman in the future and can't figure out whether the father is a man or a woman, it will be bad. As she spoke, she glanced at Jean Wan, thought for a moment, and said, after moving the headquarters of the company in London here, should we move it to this building? In fact, it's quite inconvenient in the west of the city. There are often traffic jams from here to the city center. There are several new high-rise office buildings in the city center. We can buy them. Chapter 428. It's the current High City branch of the Shine Group, the predecessor of the MO Corporation. The land next to it used to be a bank, but it was demolished and rebuilt. Now it's an office building with more than 80 floors, as tall as the Shine Group. Xia Tian wanted to say that if Jean Wan's office was on the top floor, she could be Mo Jingshan's neighbor. After all, they had the same height, the same floor, and the same floor-to-ceiling windows. They could see each other as soon as they turned around. However, before Xia Tian could finish her words, she saw Jean Wan's expressionless face. Jean Wan. No. Xia Tian. But although this building is big enough, MN Group is not an ordinary small company in the world. It ranks among the top 10 Chinese companies. Don't you feel aggrieved staying in an office building on the west side of the city? Why should I feel aggrieved? High City is so big, and there are many office buildings in the city center. If the west side can't accommodate it, we can go to the east, north, or south of the city or the commercial district. Although the office buildings on the commercial district are expensive, we can afford them. Why do you want me to go to the city center? Xia Tian choked for a moment. She didn't say anything more to avoid provoking her. That night, when the people of MN Group got off work, Xia Tian asked Jean Wan on behalf of several old colleagues in the company if she would like to have dinner with them in the evening. However, when they reached the door of the office, they saw that Jean Wan had come out. The woman in a red dress was beautiful. Even if she just walked out of the office, she was dazzling, and several male employees who had just passed by on this floor stared at her. Xiao Ba and the others asked if you want to have dinner tonight. Let's talk about it another day. I just came back today. I'll go home and tidy up tonight. Jean Wan pressed the button of the elevator and said indifferently, I don't need to rush to the company. I have to go back to the Ji family. I haven't asked about Ji Mengran for the past 2 days, but recently I heard that there seems to be some news about her. I have to go back and have a look. Okay, then let's move the dinner to the weekend. You haven't been back for more than 3 years, and we old colleagues have been helping you keep the family business in High City. We should get together. Sure. As Jean Wan spoke, the elevator door opened. She turned back and smiled at Xia Tian and the colleagues behind her. Everyone, see you tomorrow. Even when the elevator door closed, Xia Tian still stood there and looked at the door. After a long silence, she turned to look at little Mina, who was about to turn around and go to work. She reached out and grabbed her clothes. Xiao Ba stumbled as he was pulled. He quickly stabilized his body and turned around in surprise. Sister Xia. Xia Tian pointed to the elevator with her chin and asked, "Has Jin Wan been like this in England all these years?" "What state?" Little 8 was a little confused. "Just like that. Didn't you say that Mr. Vince often went to England for the past 3 years? Didn't you say that Mr. Vince had been pursuing her, but she had never fallen for him? Did she mention Mo Jingshan?" Little 8 shook his head. "Never mentioned it. Regarding Mo Jingshan, she hasn't mentioned a single word." Little 8 continued to shake his head. Indeed, he never mentioned it. That night, Jin Wan returned to the apartment of more than 200 square meters that she bought 3 years ago before she went to London. The apartment was near the original office building and was still some distance from the west side of the city. Xia Tian had arranged a car for her to drive back, but in the past 3 years, many roads in High City had been built. She was afraid that she might not be familiar with many roads and take the wrong one, so she didn't drive but took a taxi back. In fact, she had only lived in this apartment for 2 or 3 days. After leaving a lot of luggage here, she left and didn't even clean up the room. She opened the door and went in, only to find that nothing had changed inside, but no one had come in to clean it for 3 years. All the furniture was covered with dust, and the suitcases were also covered with a thin layer of dust. Jin Wan walked in with the suitcase in her hand and called the security guard to hire an auntie from a cleaning company. Together with the auntie, she spent more than an hour cleaning up the apartment inside and outside. When the aunt left, Jin Wan went inside and opened the suitcases she had left behind. The clothes she had worn in High City 3 years ago reappeared in her sight, the computer she had used 3 years ago, some paraphernalia, all kinds of. She might live here for a while, so she hung all the clothes she could still wear in the cabinet. When all the suitcases were empty, she picked up the last suitcase and took out all the things in it. She saw the velvet box at the bottom. She paused, looked at the velvet box for a few seconds, and then looked away. She knew it was the blue diamond in it. She picked it up, threw a pile of mobile phones, computer chargers, and other things into the drawer in the middle of the cabinet, closed the drawer without looking at it, and turned to continue to pack other things. It wasn't until 11 o'clock at night that Jin Wan took a shower and sat down on the sofa tiredly. There were still some daily necessities she hadn't bought. She would buy them tomorrow night. She was really exhausted tonight. After taking such a long flight and dealing with the problem of Hing Company, she hadn't rested until now and was seriously out of strength. Just as Jin Wan was about to fall asleep on the sofa, her cell phone suddenly beeped, indicating that the cell phone was low on battery. She touched the sofa with her eyes closed and took a look at the cell phone. There was only 5% battery left. She had just returned to China and didn't know how many things she had to do and how many calls she had to answer from tomorrow. No matter how tired she was, she got up and went back to the bedroom, opened the cabinet, and took out the charger from the drawer. As soon as she took out the charger, the velvet box she had thrown in the cabinet was scratched open by a wire, and the blue diamond safely placed in it fell out of the box, fell on the carpet at Jin Wan's feet, rolled on it, and finally stopped. Jin Wan paused for a moment and lowered her eyes to look at the blue diamond on the carpet. She slowly plugged in the charger, squatted down, and picked up the blue diamond. The light in the bedroom was not turned on, and the blue diamond was reflected by the moonlight coming in through the window. If she suddenly decided to return something that she couldn't return 3 years ago, she would be provoking grandfather Mo and the Mo family. But if she didn't return it, what should she do with this diamond? Would she just leave such a precious thing at home for no reason? Chapter 429. The next morning, Jin Wan went back to the Ji family. In the past 3 years, Ji Hongwen was still the same. When he was in good health, he could walk alone, but when he was in poor health, he had to walk slowly or ask his assistant to help him. Fortunately, Ji Hongwen didn't have any serious illness, so the Ji family didn't go bankrupt, and Ji Hongwen didn't die in the hospital. Instead, the Ji Corporation was more stable in the business circle than before because Ji Nwan invested a sum of money in some new projects. Dad, didn't you say Mengran returned to High City 2 years ago? Didn't she tell you where she was in the past year? Ji Nwan helped Ji Hongwen walk on the lawn in the front yard of the Ji family. Ji Hongwen smiled. No, it's good that she's still alive. She didn't want to tell me, so I didn't ask. Besides, she rarely returned to the Ji family in the past 2 years. Instead, he paused and took a look at Ji Nwan. Mengran almost doesn't regard the Ji family as her home. I rarely see her, but the only thing I'm sure is that she doesn't have to worry about food and shelter. She must have a good backer. A few days ago, I heard from a servant that she saw Mengran in the department store. She got into the Xing family's car. The Xing family? Xing Yihan. Ji Nwan's gaze faltered, and she exchanged a silent look with Ji Hongwen. Even though Ji Hongwen didn't say much, his meaning was obvious. He gave her some hints. But after all, Mengran was his daughter. He couldn't directly remind Ji Nwan to be careful of the Xing family, but he wanted to let Ji Nwan know. Ji Nwan continued to walk with Ji Hongwen's help, saying, I know. Don't worry. As long as Mengran doesn't target me, I won't make trouble for her. Ji Hongwen sighed, I also hope that she won't target you. Even if she does, with her little ability, she'll just run in front of you and show her cowardice. Of course not. Don't underestimate your daughter. Mengran is very thoughtful. She won't let herself be taken advantage of. Besides, she has Xing Yihan as her backer now, doesn't she? Ji Nwan curved her lips into a smile. She had said these words to make Ji Hongwen happy. Toward Ji Mengran, she had never intended to be soft-hearted. Ji Hongwen shook his head, coughed, and asked Ji Nwan to help him sit down on the bench in the yard. After sitting down, Ji Hongwen sighed. If Xing Yihan really loves her, then it's fine. But I know how he feels about you and Mengran. He won't easily change his mind. As for keeping Mengran by his side, I'm afraid he has other plans. When the two of them got together, it was nothing more than a superficial effort. To put it bluntly, they were using each other to get what they needed. Ji Nwan didn't say much but just smiled. Dad, don't worry. I'm not a child anymore. I'm in control of my own life. What path I want to take is also my own choice. It's useless for you to worry about it. Ji Hongwen nodded and sighed. Yes, you've all grown up. I really can't care too much. Both of you have your own things to do, especially you. In just a few years, you have become the benchmark of young female entrepreneurs in the business world. I was not as good as you when I was young. With this, Ji Hongwen paused and then said, It's been some years since your mother passed away. In a few days, when I feel better, accompany me to the temple to worship her. By the way, let her see how you look now, so that she can rest assured in heaven. Okay. Ji Nwan helped him up from the bench. In the afternoon, before the MN group got off work, Ji Nwan went to the company. Seeing her, Xia Shi came over with her round belly and asked her at the desk, Did you go back to the Ji family to see your father this morning? Yes. Before she said a few words, Ji Nwan's cell phone rang. She asked Xia Tian to sit aside and not to keep swaying in front of her with her big belly. Then she picked up the phone, walked to the window, and picked it up. Miss G, the things you sent from England to Los Angeles a few days ago were not received. Shall we send them back to London for you, or what shall we do with them? How could they not be received? couldn't they have been sent back in the past few years? Well, these things were sent to the prison every few months. Elder Su passed away 2 years ago. If Su Jilan couldn't receive them, no one in the Su family could receive them for her. But I forgot to tell you that Su Jilan committed suicide by taking poison in prison at the end of last month. Jean Wan's expression remained unchanged as she looked at the street outside the French window. Committed suicide by taking poison. Yes, Su Jilan committed suicide on the 28th of last month. I got it. Destroy all the things I sent. Okay. Do you have any other instructions, Miss G? How did she die? Was it because she had taken chronic poison for a long time? The person on the other end of the line was surprised. How did you know? Jean Wan didn't speak anymore and hung up. Jean Wan had just come back yesterday, so they didn't have a chance to talk much. Xia Tian waited for her all morning and finally got her back. However, Jean Wan stood by the window after answering the phone. Even though she could only see her back, she looked so cold that she didn't dare to approach her. What's wrong? Xia Tian asked. Jean Wan turned back to her desk and sat down in silence. Su Jilan was dead. She committed suicide by taking poison. Jean Wan had contacted Su Shui's parents and asked them to send Su Shui's belongings and Su Shui's childhood diary to her. She had read Su Shui's childhood diary and specially selected the pages where Su Shui wrote about how good she was with cousin Su Jilan, how they went out to play together, and how they loved each other as sisters. She sent the diary and Su Jilan's belongings to Su Jilan's prison every few months as long as she had time. Su Jilan was a silly cousin who always thought they loved each other so much that she sacrificed her life, and Su Jilan was a cousin who was locked up in prison and deprived of freedom forever. Jean Wan had never forgotten the pool of blood that flowed between her legs after she fell off the Los Angeles freeway. She had never forgotten to avenge her child. Even though Su Jilan had gotten the punishment she deserved and was losing weight in prison, and even tried to commit suicide several times, she still tortured her mind with these things again and again. Before flying back to High City from London, Jean Wan sent Su Shui's last diary and belongings to her, but she didn't expect that Su Jilan was dead. Chapter 430. How could it be exactly the same? It was said that Su Jilan had tried to escape from prison, but she was caught before she could escape the encirclement. She mutilated herself in prison and even threatened the police by cutting herself with a blade. The police were indifferent and even transferred her to a dark prison where she couldn't even see the sun. It was as if there was a huge net that was pushing everything forward, pushing the original trajectory of everything forward repeatedly. Everything seemed to be the same as in her previous life. The only difference was that all the twists and turns and frame-ups Jean Wan had experienced were done for her by others. When the truck driver died of poisoning in prison, Jean Wan wondered if the real cause of her death in her previous life had something to do with Su Jilan, and if Su Jilan had always regarded her as a thorn in her side. But now Su Jilan's experience and cause of death were almost copied from Jean Wan's. Except for the difference between Los Angeles and High City, and the twists and turns in the middle, the cause and the result were the same. Even 7 years earlier, everything had returned to the original point. Who on earth was driving all this? Jean Wan's life had been completely turned upside down in her previous life, but now it was completely righted. If everything went according to the trajectory of her previous life, then Jean Wan, the lifeline that was broken by Su Jilan, now fell on Su Jilan's head. Did this mean that the murderer of her previous life took over this trajectory for her? Did she die because of the cause and effect of her previous life? If she hadn't been reborn, Jean Wan would never have such a bizarre idea, but at this moment, she had to think so. So, was there some kind of omen, or was it all caused by someone? On the weekend, Jean Wan accompanied Ji Hongwen to the temple. In the past, Ji Hongwen had the habit of visiting the temple every year. However, at that time, Jin Wan was still young and her temperament was unstable. He was afraid that she and Ji Mengran, these two little girls, would be disrespectful to the various gods in the temple, so he never brought them here. After your mother passes away, I'll come here when I have time. Go inside and burn some incense. Ji Hongwen handed 3 lit incense sticks to Jin Wan. Jin Wan received the incense and turned to enter. After that, Jin Wan accompanied Ji Hongwen to worship in the temple for more than half an hour. Seeing that Jin Wan didn't seem to be used to the atmosphere in the temple, Ji Hongwen patted her hand and said, "I'll go inside for a while and talk to a master I've known for many years. You can walk outside or find a shady place to sit down and wait for me." Jin Wan nodded. It was rare for her to return home, so she was patient. All right. When Ji Hongwen went inside, Jin Wan turned around and found a place with few people on the bluestone path in the temple to stand for a while. Then she felt the sun was too hot, so she turned to rest under an ancient banyan tree that had grown here for who knew how many years. She had heard that it was best not to touch a cell phone in the temple, let alone take photos. Bored, she pulled out her hand that had reached into her bag. She heard someone next to her shaking the lot holder and mumbling something. She looked around and saw that many people were shaking the lot holder. After more than half an hour, it was almost afternoon, and there were fewer and fewer people. Looking at the lot holder quietly placed there, she didn't know what she wanted. Perhaps it was too boring to wait here, so she got up and picked up the lot holder. She imitated those people and shook it for a long time until a brand new long red lot fell on the table. Jin Wan glanced at the round shape drawn with a golden pen on the long lot and felt a little strange. She really couldn't understand it, so she picked up the other long lots in the lot holder and found that many of them were written with the words top, bottom, middle, and so on, but there were also some pictures and words that she couldn't understand, and the content of each lot was different. She picked up the one that had fallen out and turned to an old master who was also enjoying the shade under the tree. "Master, may I ask you to interpret the lot?" Just now, she saw that the people who had shaken the lot earlier seemed to come to this old master. The old master glanced at her, then at the long lot in her hand, and immediately looked at her in surprise. "Little girl, did you shake it out or deliberately draw it out from inside?" "Of course I shook it out." The old master took her long lot, looked at it for a while, and smiled. "Don't you find that the other long lots in the lot holder have become lighter in color and look very old? Only this one is new. I found it." Jin Wan had just noticed it. Since ancient times, the lot holders in all temples have been very meaningful. They usually carry incense, so if there are no special circumstances, the lot inside will not be changed, but the one before this long lot, probably because it has been too long, the circle on it has become dilapidated and lost the meaning of the circle. So only this lot has been replaced with a new one. It was changed not long ago, and the new lot hasn't been weathered much. It is lighter than the other lots, and it is very difficult to shake it out. During this time, no one has been able to shake it out, but you are the first one to shake it out. Jin Wan didn't quite understand what he meant, but seeing the old master smiling, she asked patiently and casually, "So? What's the meaning of this circle?" A circle is a line centered on a point, always around a central point, walking along the same trajectory, without deviation or break point. The old master said with a smile, "It indicates perfection, the completeness of the trajectory of your life, and the return to the origin, which means that you will never go astray again." Jin Wan looked at the circle on the long lot and froze. The origin again. She had heard this word many times 3 years ago. If you had gotten a long stick that hadn't been changed before, the circle wouldn't be complete. After being exposed to the wind and the sun, there would be many broken points, and the stick would be full of danger. However, this new stick that you got means that you've avoided those broken points. Come to think of it, it's strange. This sign has been here for more than 10 years, but it was changed just before you shook it out. It seems that you must have had some unusual experience to be able to jump over those broken tracks. This new circle perhaps represents a brand new life, which means that it's very complete. The old master put his palms together and bowed to her, then turned to continue to interpret the lots for others. Jean Wan stood by the side, holding the long lot and looking at the new circle without any broken points. A new life. Chapter 431. In 2 weeks, all the procedures for MN Group's headquarters to move back to China had been completed, and many tricky things had been handled. In the end, Jean Wan decided to temporarily set the company's headquarters on the west side of the city and bought 2 more 30-story office buildings behind the original office building. In the past few years, because the company was just established in the UK, there were many social events to attend, so Jean Wan's alcohol tolerance really soared. Now she was no longer the kind of person who would collapse after 1 or 2 drinks, but she still instinctively disliked alcohol. During the period after returning to China, Jean Wan cultivated herself and didn't drink or socialize. Except for the old staff dinner she attended once, she basically went to work during the day and returned to her apartment after work at night. She went to bed early and got up early, adjusting her life to a very regular pattern. She was much better than when she first returned to China. Xia Tian might go into labor at any time this month. Sometimes she almost couldn't walk in the company with her hands on her waist, but she still refused to rest at home. Jean Wan arranged an office for her and asked her to read the company's documents from time to time. She didn't need to worry about other things. But Jean Wan hadn't decided who would be promoted to vice president, so she had to deal with some trivial things in person. For example, this Friday, there would be a real estate and architecture exhibition held in the High City Exhibition Center. Because many provincial and municipal leaders would go, the leaders of major real estate companies or companies involved in the real estate and construction industry would go. Xia Tian couldn't attend this kind of event now, so Jean Wan had to go. Boss, it is said that many famous people in High City's business circle will go to this exhibition. It seems that in addition to the exhibition, there will be a bidding conference, and then the Municipal Tourism Bureau will invite all the distinguished guests to try to stay in the newly built seaside resort in the south of High City for 2 nights, but the quota is limited. It seems that I can't go with you. Xiao Ba handed the exhibition invitation to Jean Wan and said with a regretful and disappointed expression. Try to stay for 2 nights. Hasn't High City been expanding its tourism industry for the past few years? That seaside resort was jointly built by the government, the city's tourism bureau, and several well-known companies in the city. It's about to open to the public, but before it opens to the public, we're inviting you industry bigwigs to enjoy it first. To put it bluntly, we're inviting you bigwigs to the site in person. It's also a form of advertising for the resort. After all, so many bigwigs have tried staying there before. Let's go to the exhibition first. As for the invitation to stay, we'll see how it goes. Jean Wan put down the invitation and glanced at Xiao Ba. If you want to go, why don't you go for me? The corner of Xiao Ba's mouth twitched. The people going there are all extraordinary people. In our entire company, only you and Sister Xia can go. After all, one is the president and the other is the vice president. If I, as a special assistant, go, won't I be giving our MN group a hard time? Jean Wan couldn't help chuckling at Xiao Ba's choice of words. She glanced at her. Which big boss in the business world isn't busy every day? How would she have the time to attend such an event? Anyway, it's the face of the leaders of the province and the city. No matter how busy they are, there will always be a lot of people who will go, even if it's just a formality. Jean Wan didn't say more. Anyway, there were still 2 days before Friday, and there was no hurry. As Xiao Ba said, she would go as a formality. Boss, don't take it lightly. Boss, don't take it lightly. Sister Xia has talked to me before. You may not know how terrible the change in High City's business circle has been in the past few years. 3 years ago, some of the companies that you were familiar with closed down or were acquired. However, many companies have risen in the past 3 years, so you may not know many of them, and you may not know the current situation in High City. The cooperation between business and government has always been the trend in the real estate industry, so they will definitely give you face. Okay, I'll definitely go, and I'll definitely pay attention to it. I won't be perfunctory, okay? Jean Wan tooted and threw the folder in her hand into her arms. Don't hang out with Xia Tian in the future. Now you're learning to nag like her. Then you can dress up well. Don't be too casual, okay? Jean Wan glanced at her again. Xiao Ba immediately took a big step back and quickly left the office before Jean Wan kicked her off the floor-to-ceiling window out of impatience. However, the truth was that on Friday afternoon, Jean Wan was dragged home by Xia Tian and Xiao Ba. Xia Tian had ordered a dress for Jean Wan in advance. It was a blue strapless evening gown. The color was very clean and fresh, which was Jean Wan's favorite style. However, Jean Wan couldn't understand why the two of them were so excited over such an event. They either reminded her to take it seriously or reminded her to dress up well. It was only the afternoon, but they had already dragged her home to help her try on her gown and do her hair. They had even bought her matching shoes. Jean Wan deeply suspected that they didn't want her to attend an event at all but to go on a blind date. After Jean Wan was forced to change her clothes, the stylist they brought pressed her onto a chair and did a simple hairstyle. Xiao Ba had just stood up when she heard Xiao Ba shouting from behind, "Oh my God, it's too beautiful. Boss, this blue isn't something an ordinary person can handle. You're really too white. Sob, I'm so envious, jealous, and hateful. You look so beautiful in this color." Xiao Ba stamped her feet excitedly as she spoke and then turned her eyes to Xia Tian with a sneaky smile. Jean Wan glanced at her indifferently. "What on earth haven't you two told me? Isn't it just an exhibition?" "It's an exhibition, but it's rare to see such a gathering of big shots. You're the pillar of our company, and you've just entered the Forbes list this year. Many people are curious about you. Since you've returned to China and it's your first time attending such a large-scale event, you can't bring shame to our company, can you?" Xia Tian said and stared at Jean Wan's neck. "Is there something missing?" "There is indeed something missing." Xiao Ba also stared at Jean Wan's neck. "Such a beautiful collarbone. It would be perfect if there were a beautiful diamond in the middle." Jean Wan's eyelids twitched. Before she spoke, the two women ran into her bedroom and rummaged for a long time but couldn't find any jewelry. Just as Xia Tian was complaining that Jean Wan didn't even have jewelry in her house, Xiao Ba opened the drawer in the middle of the cabinet. A moment later, she shouted, "Found it." Chapter 432. On the night of the exhibition, Jean Wan arrived at High City's exhibition center by car. Before alighting, she thought for a moment before removing the necklace from her neck and placing it in her bag. At that time, the stylist that Xiao Ba and Xia Tian brought along carried several platinum necklaces with her. This type of stylist was familiar with the preferences of the rich ladies of the upper class. Nowadays, many people like to buy these types of uncut diamonds to keep at home. Whenever there was a banquet or event, they would pick out some nice-looking necklaces to match. In the middle of the necklaces, there was a semi-net made of platinum that perfectly fit the blue diamond, turning it into a luxurious blue diamond necklace. When she wore it back then, it was indeed beautiful. This 10-carat blue diamond was too rare, and a blue diamond of such purity was even harder to find in the world. Wearing it like this at such a gathering of important people would be too conspicuous. MN Group had been rising rapidly in the past few years and was viewed as a thorn in the side by many in the industry. Having just returned to the country, it would attract the attention of many in the industry. It was better not to attract too much attention, so Jean Wan decided not to wear it. After alighting from the car, a staff member at the entrance of the exhibition center was responsible for checking the invitation in her hands. He then respectfully guided her to the red carpet. After passing through the red carpet, she would arrive at the main entrance of the exhibition center. Jean Wan smiled and walked toward the red carpet. Just as Xiaoba had said, High City's upper class had undergone a change of dynasties in the past 3 years. Many of the important people were unfamiliar faces. Even if there were a few who looked familiar, almost none of them recognized Jean Wan. The woman was dressed in a blue dress that perfectly complemented her graceful figure. Her exquisite face was lightly made up, and her fair and tender skin appeared pure and clear under the lights of the exhibition center. The convention center was not a place that ordinary people could enter. The people present were either the heads of famous companies or the young ladies of influential families. Some of them had seen Jean Wan at other banquets and could more or less recognize her. However, they did not dare to recognize her at this moment. In the past, Ji Ming was already beautiful enough, but now, on this red carpet, everyone present seemed to have become the background. The woman in the blue dress was like a goddess walking out of a Western painting, elegant and sexy. This kind of blue softened the pure beauty of Eastern women, and her fair and delicate face seemed to be the most precious treasure in the world. As the saying goes, a woman is all about her bones, not her skin. What's rare is that she has a good appearance and a beautiful body. There's not a single part of her that can be picked on. Even some of the media hidden in the crowd couldn't help but raise their cameras to take pictures in that direction. Jean Wan strode forward as though there was no one around, allowing everyone's eyes to fall on her. She smiled politely at the people around her, lifted the hem of her skirt that reached her feet, and walked into the main entrance of the exhibition center under the guidance of the security guards. She was neither early nor late. She was at least 20 minutes earlier than the time stated on the invitation. There were already many people gathered in the exhibition center. In the center of the hall, there was a huge overlooking model of the entire high city that was thousands of meters wide. Every building and location that was built or tendered by the major companies was marked out. From time to time, people in the crowd greeted her. Some knew her, some didn't, and even if they didn't know her before, they had studied MN Group because of Jean Wan's ranking on Forbes this year and had seen her photos. Jean Wan smiled at everyone who greeted her and did not say much. At most, she would say, "Hello." At 7:00 in the evening, the exhibition had already begun. Before Jean Wan could go to the location with her company's logo, she suddenly heard the whispers of several reporters not far away. "Earlier, I heard from the people at the entrance that Shine Group CEO Mo is here. Hurry up and go take some pictures. It's rare to get CEO Mo's face. He's been in Los Angeles for the past few years and hasn't appeared in front of the media since returning to China. Hurry up and take some pictures, hurry up." As the reporters turned around and quietly rushed toward the entrance, Jean Wan turned around and saw that there were already quite a number of people in front of the exhibition center. Shenmu raised his hand to stop the reporters from getting too close. At the same time, he smiled politely and greeted the reporters, telling them not to take any pictures. This was an official event, not some celebrity news event. It was not suitable for the reporters to participate. By Shenmu's side, there was a quiet, tall, and yet extremely eye-catching figure. His face was cold and handsome, like an outstanding creation of God's uncanny workmanship. The man's suit was well ironed, and his shirt was buttoned up to the top. He was meticulous, cold, and noble. His eyes were deep and clear, and his tall figure was much taller than Shenmue, who was 1.8 meters tall. In the eyes of many women, this man who was rarely seen was mysterious, obstinate, and cold and seductive. It was this man who, in just a few seconds, caused the smile on Jean Wan's face to subside slightly. In the past 3 years, she never thought that there would be a day when they would meet again after such a long separation. Perhaps, from the moment this man pushed her away step by step, she should have guessed the result. Perhaps it would be another 10 years of separation, or perhaps they would never meet again in this lifetime. However, on the flight back to China, after learning about Shine Group's movements from Shenmue, she did not think about these things anymore. For example, she was not surprised to see Mo Jingshan here, but it was indeed a little sudden. Although it had been a long time since she asked about him, Jean Wan had roughly heard from others. For example, he had become colder and more decisive in the business world, and was even more taciturn than before. He seemed to be the same as before, working, socializing, and doing whatever he had to do. He did not reveal the slightest hint of his emotions in front of others, but the people around him and his business partners were all very careful, afraid that if they were not careful, they would step on a landmine and be destroyed by the powerful Shine Group. Because of the scene in front of the convention center, Jean Wan's expression did not change much. She directly withdrew her gaze, as though everything had nothing to do with her, and walked to her company's seat. However, for a moment, she could not help but suspect if Xia Tian and Xiao Ba had dressed up so much today because they knew Mo Jingshan would come today. Jean Wan pursed her lips and took out the bidding documents from her bag. She listened to the city leader's speech, and not long after, she heard a faint commotion from behind. She indifferently glanced back, only to see Mo Jingshan walking in this direction of the crowd. Chapter 433. However, Shenmue's eyes were very sharp. He immediately spotted Jean Wan. After glancing in her direction, he approached and greeted her. CEO G. This time, he called her CEO G, not Miss G. Shenmue knew why Jean Wan would appear at this kind of exhibition, so he did not bring up the past. Jean Wan nodded at Shenmue and could not help but look at Mo Jingshan. For a moment, when their eyes met, the man's gaze fell on her side. His pupils were dark, and his gaze was clear. There were people all around them, and many of them were looking in this direction. Jean Wan smiled and casually greeted, CEO Mo, nice to meet you. 4 simple words. She did not even say long time no see. Instead, she said, nice to meet you, CEO Mo. Mo Jingshan nodded and gave her a very ordinary glance, as though it was indeed the first time they met in the business world and there was nothing special about it. The man shifted his gaze and walked toward the Shine Group's logo on the other side. At that moment, what Jean Wan saw in the man's eyes was the same deep, calm, and unperturbed as she remembered. The smile on Jean Wan's lips did not change, but it remained polite and slightly cold. This kind of peace was good. At least, no one needed to deliberately avoid it. Seeing that CEO Mo had left, Shenmue turned and smiled at Jean Wan. I don't think there's much opportunity to chat with Miss G on such an occasion. Did you come alone? Jean Wan did not nod or shake her head. She only curved her lips at Shenmue and slightly raised her hand to make an inviting gesture, meaning for him to go and not to be so polite to her. At the same time, when Jean Wan withdrew her gaze, she caught a glimpse of the black suit Mo Jingshan was wearing. It was as heavy in black as ever, as though it could completely drown out all the storms that had happened around him. Time had passed, but he did not seem to have changed at all. 3 years had flowed on him, and he had lost his usual reserved and gentle temperament, leaving only a hint of ruthlessness and indifference. He was just a few meters away, but it seemed as though he was already far away and even more unreachable. But the man was still handsome and tall, as though he was made of nature. Mo Jingshan was no longer the man she had been separated from for 10 years. He was also no longer the man who had doted on her endlessly and was even willing to die for her. He seemed to have become the most complete him. This was his true appearance. Seeing that she had no intention of speaking, Shenmu could only nod at her and turn to leave. Mo Jingshan had already gone to the other side of the aisle. He did not even look at her. This reunion came and ended abruptly. However, it was just right so that she didn't feel awkward or uncomfortable. After the exhibition, there was a party. Jean Wan was still considering inviting the guests to stay in the seaside resort. Earlier at the exhibition, she had seen 2 familiar figures. However, at that time, there were provincial and city leaders giving speeches. They were also discussing the development direction of High City with the business elites who were present based on the city's bidding and construction matters. It was not convenient for her to wander around in such a serious exhibition. At the end of the exhibition, melodious music rang in the exhibition hall. From time to time, people would raise their glasses and toast each other in groups of 3 to 5. From time to time, the CEOs of some companies who didn't have much impression of Jean Wan would raise their glasses to toast her. When they learned that Jean Wan was the CEO of MN Group, they repeatedly sighed in admiration. They handed their business cards and introduced each other to each other. Jean Wan couldn't leave them for a while. She was very beautiful. Her beautiful face and the faintly discernible coldness around her made men even more attracted to her. For such a woman, they really wanted to get to the bottom of it. At this moment, 2 old acquaintances suddenly came. When Ji Mengrand appeared in Jean Wan's sight holding Xing Yihan's arm, Jean Wan only looked at Ji Mingran's face for a few seconds, as though confirming that she was really alive. However, Ji Mingran's eyes were very sharp, as though there was a fire burning directly on Jean Wan. However, Jean Wan just glanced at her indifferently and raised her glass slightly. Ji Hongwen had already told her some of Ji Mingran's situation, so he didn't intend to say anything to her. However, Ji Mengran held Xing Yihan's arm and seemed to snuggle intimately. When Jean Wan raised her glass slightly, she raised her eyebrows and smiled at her. "I thought you planned to live in England and never come back. I didn't expect that in just 3 years, you'd come back to High City. Is it because you can't make a living in London? Do you have to come back to a small place like High City?" Jean Wan's indifferent gaze fell on her and then glanced at Xing Yihan beside her. When her gaze returned to Ji Mengran, she gave a faint smile. "High City is indeed a small place. I've only just come back and I've already met you. We've been seeing each other for so long. How small is this place?" "Mengran, even though you've been missing for so long, you still came back. Is it because you can't escape the circle of High City, or because you haven't made a name for yourself outside and have no choice but to come back to find a backer?" Ji Mengran snorted and turned to look at the man beside her. "Brother Xing, you haven't contacted Jean Wan for a long time, have you? She seems to know nothing about what happened between us." Xing Yihan's hand was placed by his side and was held tightly by Ji Mengran. Even though Xing Yihan had no intention of being intimate in public, he paused and didn't push her away. He looked at Jean Wan, who was even more radiant than usual. After a moment of silence, he said mildly, "It's only been a few years, but you've transformed from a little woman into a strong woman in the industry. It's indeed an eye-opener. But High City is a place where too many people gather. There are many things that you can't easily control. Since you've returned to the country, remember to be less aggressive and keep as low a profile as possible." These words sounded like a kind suggestion, but because Ji Mengran was standing by the side, it seemed to be a kind of sarcasm. Jean Wan certainly knew that in the domestic business world, Only by knowing when to advance and when to retreat could she protect herself. Although MN Group was now well known in the Chinese circle, after all, it hadn't been long since it was established. It wasn't difficult for it to be trampled under the foot of others. CEO Xing, are you saying kind words? Jean Wan glanced at him without batting an eyelid, casually playing with the champagne glass in her hand, and said in a cool and quiet voice, I have a clear view of my career, and I have some experience in ups and downs. But I heard. Chapter 434. Jean Wan paused and glanced at her with a faint smile. Do you also want to enter the real estate industry? Ji Mingran's expression faltered. She glared at Jean Wan harshly. What do you mean by also want to enter the real estate industry? There are many real estate studios in High City, but the market demand is too high. I'm not young anymore. I should have my own things to do. Brother Sheng has only invested a sum of money for me. Why? Are you afraid that my studio will grow stronger and stronger in High City and take away your business? I don't think so. I'm afraid it won't be so easy for you to snatch a piece of meat from my mouth. Jean Wan smiled coldly and raised her glass to her. After all, we used to be sisters who grew up together. Since you are so confident that you want to try your luck in this industry, why don't I propose a toast to you first and wish you success, N. Jean Wan's eyes were smiling, but the coldness and sarcasm in them made Ji Mingran's expression turn ugly. She didn't take her glass but leaned against Xing Yihan's side. Brother Xing, I've greeted my acquaintance. Let's go. We have to go to the Huanhai Resort tonight. I don't know when we can sleep. Let's go rest for a while. Xing Yihan's gaze fell heavily on Jean Wan. Jean Wan could see that Xing Yihan had changed a lot over the years. He was no longer the lonely and brave brother Xing she used to be, nor was he as a famous orthopedic doctor in High City. He had been infected with the shrewdness and ambition of many businessmen, and he didn't restrain his ambition at all. But in front of Jean Wan, he still restrained some of his emotions and said, goodbye. Jean Wan didn't look at him anymore. She turned and left, not even intending to say goodbye. Seeing that Xing Yihan's gaze was still fixed on Jean Wan's back as she walked away, Ji Mengran said with a smile, we meet again. Do you still think you must have this Jean Wan? Back then, you couldn't get her. Now that she's like this, I'm afraid it's even more impossible for you to get her. A woman who is too beautiful is very scary. A woman who is beautiful but has no heart is not someone anyone can resist. With that, Ji Mengran let go of his hand, but her face was still full of smiles. Did you see that? She can even meet Mo Jingshan without batting an eyelid and pass by him emotionlessly, let alone you. What can she do to you? Xing Yihan glanced at her coldly. Take your money and do your work. Don't say things you shouldn't say in front of me. Don't forget where your life was saved. In front of me, you are not qualified to tell me what to do. Ji Mengran smiled, picked up a glass of wine on the waiter's tray, and put it to her lips, hiding the flash of hatred in her eyes. It was true that she didn't board the plane that crashed and managed to keep her life. However, due to a combination of circumstances, she was forced to flee the country and mistakenly boarded a pirate ship. In the end, she was trafficked to Africa. Because she lost her freedom, she was humiliated and invaded by countless people. Even she couldn't count them all. It was only when she was emaciated and covered in wounds that Xing Yihan found her and brought her back from that hopeless situation. Xing Yihan hired a psychiatrist to treat her for a year before she gave up the idea of suicide. But why did Xing Yihan save her? Ever since he followed Shen Haru into the Ji family, he had wholeheartedly liked Jean Wan. This kind of feeling would not change. As for saving her, it was because of the Ji family and Jean Wan. Of course, there were other reasons. She knew this, and he also knew her unruly thoughts. The two of them seemed to be dating on the surface, but in reality, they were just taking what they needed. Not to mention sleeping in the same bed, they didn't even kiss each other. Xing Yihan found her disgusting, and she had no interest in him either. Once a person became infatuated with someone, as long as they couldn't get it, they would never forget it. Xing Yihan treated Jin Wan this way, and she treated Mo Jingshan the same way. So what if he couldn't get it? At least, Jin Wan couldn't get it. Ji Mengran drank the wine with a smile and gently touched the pink diamond necklace she specially wore to match her dress today. She said softly, "Brother Xing, I'm tired. I'm going to rest for a while. I'll come to you when I'm about to leave." Xing Yihan's eyes were cold and he didn't respond. Ji Mengran had long been used to this way of getting along with him. She smiled at him again, and when someone looked over, she leaned close to him. After saying a few more words intimately, she turned and left. Xing Yihan didn't show much expression from beginning to end. Only after Ji Mengran had gone far away did he gradually withdraw his gaze. His cold eyes glanced at Ji Mingran's back, and his gaze was cold and thoughtful. This time, the event in the convention center was very grand. Because of the long duration, some temporary resting rooms, dressing rooms, and changing rooms were set up on the second floor of the hall. Jin Wan toasted several glasses of champagne with many people who had worked with her or would work with her in the future. She turned around and noticed that only Shenmu was talking to the city leaders, but Mo Jingshan didn't seem to be here. With Mo Jingshan's identity, he only needed to show up on many occasions and didn't need to be present all the time. It didn't matter if he had already left, gone somewhere to rest, or had other arrangements. These were not things she could care about or be curious about. Jin Wan withdrew her gaze, chatted with several representatives of various real estate companies who came to greet her, and then waved at them with a smile. "Sorry, I've drunk a lot just now. I have to go to the resting room to sober up. I've not been able to hold my liquor very well in the past few years. I've just recovered a little, but I still have to restrain myself. Otherwise, I'll easily make a fool of myself in public." Most of the people in the hall were men. Hearing her words, they didn't force her to stay. Jin Wan went straight to the second floor. Someone was changing in the dressing room, so she simply pushed open the door of the ladies' dressing room. As soon as she entered, she saw Ji Mengran sitting on the sofa in front of a dressing mirror. The places where socialites and female entrepreneurs frequented were similar to the places where female stars frequented. Besides, it was such a grand occasion, so naturally, there would be two makeup artists waiting here to touch up any lady's makeup. Chapter 435. Jin Wan glanced at the person on the sofa who appeared content. She hesitated for a moment but did not wish to cause any trouble. The moment she opened the door, she prepared to leave. However, Ji Mengran had already seen her. Her gaze had already shifted in her direction. Her eyes were filled with provocation. "Big sister, are you here to look for me?" The word "big sister" caused Jin Wan's hand to pause. She calmly turned to glance at her. The others also shifted their gaze in her direction. "Miss Ji, is she your big sister?" one of the socialites asked curiously. This Miss Ji was naturally not referring to Jin Wan. "Of course. My surname is Ji. Coincidentally, her surname is also Ji." Ji Mengran glanced at Jin Wan. Her gaze was clearly mocking the fact that Jin Wan's surname did not match her original identity. Since they had already entered the conversation, it would not be appropriate for Jin Wan to leave now. She coldly glanced in their direction and walked in. Coincidentally, she only saw drinks and wine in the hall of the convention center. She didn't find any mineral water. Seeing that there was a water dispenser in the dressing room, she went over to open the cabinet below, took out a disposable paper cup, and poured herself a cup of water. "Miss G, your sister seems to be a little cold," one of the socialites spoke up again. A certain socialite spoke again. Her first impression was that G Mengran was a very easy person to talk to. However, this sister of hers did not even greet her after entering the door, so she instinctively thought that she was the type of person who was cold and pretentious. "Don't you know about MN Group? This year, my sister, Jean Wan, climbed to the top of the Forbes list of Chinese female entrepreneurs under the age of 25. Ji Mengran looked in Jean Wan's direction and spoke seriously. It wasn't easy to climb to the top of the list. She should at least put on some airs, right? Otherwise, how can she live up to her reputation as the CEO of MN Group? The socialite and the other young lady didn't know much about Jean Wan, and Jean Wan didn't recognize them. When the two makeup artists heard that Jean Wan was the CEO of the MN Group, their indifferent expressions became slightly more restrained. The socialite and the young lady standing by Ji Mengran sneered. So what if she climbed to the top of the Forbes list? It's just like those award ceremonies in the entertainment industry. If you want to get a title, you just have to sleep with the investors a few more times. In a place like the business world where big shots gather, how hard is it to sleep to the top of the list? Ji Mengran lowered her eyes and said faintly, "That's true. My sister used to run a real estate studio in High City. Later on, she moved to England. After that, she didn't have much contact with her family. I don't know which powerful person she managed to latch onto, but her company was established and her image as a strong woman in the business world was established. Even if she really did have illicit affairs with someone, I don't think she would admit to it. Look at what I'm saying. After all, she's my sister. How could I say such things? This kind of thing is too common in this circle. It all depends on whether you are willing to serve a man." The socialite spoke as she glanced sideways at Jean Wan, who was standing there drinking water as if she did not take their words seriously. She then glanced at Ji Mengran. "Miss Ji, you have CEO Xing to support you. If you are willing to throw caution to the wind like your sister, wouldn't it be easy for you to have your own career? I'm not as willing to throw caution to the wind like her. Besides, although Brother Xing takes good care of me, it's not the kind of relationship you're talking about. Our relationship is very pure. He just takes good care of me. Why are you still being so humble? You're wearing such a large pink diamond. Pink diamonds represent pure and romantic love. Since Mr. Sheng is willing to give you this pink diamond necklace, it means that he has long been interested in you. You should hurry up and cherish this opportunity. Let CEO Xing help you build up your studio. This way, you won't be trampled on by others," a certain socialite said as she glanced in Jean Wan's direction. "That's right. This kind of pink diamond isn't cheap. Besides, it's very difficult to buy it on the market." The young lady also agreed. The other two makeup artists also looked enviously at the pink diamond necklace around Ji Mingran's neck. Then, as though out of habit, they suddenly glanced at Jean Wan's neck. They saw that although Jean Wan's gown was not bad, she was not wearing any jewelry. Although her collarbone was beautiful, it seemed as though something was missing. However, the makeup artists did not dare to speak carelessly. They could not afford to offend Miss G, nor could they afford to offend CEO G. They could only stand by Ji Mingran's sofa and try to get close to her. These women chatted for a long time, but Jean Wan remained standing there, collecting water and drinking it. After she drank half a glass of water, she placed the paper cup down. She glanced at them and went straight to the point. "Based on your intelligence and skills, it's not easy for you to gather here. After all, the world is only so big. If you want to achieve something, you can only climb into a man's bed to think of a way. Speaking up to this point, Jin Wan glanced at Ji Mengran and went straight to the point. If you want Xing Yihan to invest more money in you, you can go show off your skills. What's the point of bragging here because you can't get it? Or, my good sister, you've been sitting here for so long. I don't think it's as simple as gathering a few mobs to support you, right? Ji Mengran was just thinking about how to get Jin Wan's experiences in England when she abruptly heard her words. Her heart was filled with anger, but her face maintained a mocking smile as she looked in her direction. Right now, Jin Wan was just putting up a strong front. Back then, she was protected tightly by Mo Jingshan's side, but now, wasn't she still alone? Ji Mengran restrained her expression. Big sister, I know you don't want others to talk about you. Her words were vague, but it only made people speculate that Jin Wan had a dirty past. After all, it was already not easy for such a young woman to establish a foothold in the business world. It was even more so for her to be able to push MN Group into the top 10 Chinese enterprises in the world. Without waiting for Ji Mengran to finish, Jin Wan interrupted her. If you really want to know about my business history, why don't you wait until the book I wrote goes on sale next month and take a look at it in the bookstore? Chapter 436. Seeing Jin Wan's faint yet piercing smile, the women around the sofa were momentarily speechless. Their hearts were filled with complicated emotions. They did not expect that not only was Jin Wan's path to success becoming smoother, but she had even published a book. Jin Wan's indifferent and cold voice rang out once more. She curled her finger and lightly tapped on the table in front of the mirror. She went straight to the point and said, Ji Mengran, if you want to bask in this sister's glory, you have to see if you have the qualifications. You once said that I'm not related to you by blood, but now you want to use my current momentum to step on me. If you keep calling me sister, I'm afraid I won't have the fortune to lose weight. Ji Mengran raised her eyes and saw that Jin Wan's eyes were smiling, but there was not the slightest hint of a smile in them. She did not expect Jin Wan to publicly admit that she was not related to the Ji family by blood. She had always thought that Jin Wan minded this matter. She did not expect that she would actually be so calm. Ji Mingran's heart trembled slightly. It seemed that Jin Wan, who wasn't easy to deal with in the past, had developed a cold and hard heart after years of training. In the past, she might have had a lot of worldly wisdom to consider, but now, she really didn't care about anything. The people by the side were slightly surprised. They looked as though they wanted to hear more gossip. There was no such thing as true love in this socialite circle. Besides, these people had only met here today and were just chatting with each other. If they continued to dig deeper, not only would they be able to drag Jin Wan down, they most likely would not have a good ending. Ji Mengran returned to her senses and did not speak anymore. She raised her hand and slowly played with her hair, softly saying, "Help me redo my hair. I'll be changing out of my gown in a while. I have to go to the resort later. I don't think there will be any makeup artists with me. It won't be easy to remove my hair." The two young ladies saw that Ji Mengran did not intend to speak anymore and immediately shifted their gaze to Jin Wan. Ji Mengran did not deliberately nitpick, and Jin Wan did not say anything more. When Ji Mengran sat in front of the makeup mirror, Jin Wan calmly sat on the other side. "Aren't there two makeup artists? I'll have to trouble one of you to help me rearrange my hair." "Thank you." Jin Wan's tone was mild and calm. The two makeup artists looked at each other, and one of them, who could tell whose aura was stronger, immediately came to Jin Wan's side. She raised her hand and helped her remove the small hairpin hidden in her hairstyle, asking, "CEOG, what do you want to do? Let's comb out the style and make it look simple." "All right." Ji Mengran saw that Jin Wan was not affected by this place at all and could even calmly ask the makeup artist to do her hair as though no one else was around. Ji Mengran glanced at her in the mirror. Jin Wan did not look at her. She closed her eyes and rested. Each of them was a mirror. Although neither of them spoke, anyone with a discerning eye could tell that Ji Mengran was more or less indignant. On the other hand, Jin Wan was unperturbed despite the wind blowing in her face. Women naturally liked to be hostile to women who stood too tall or were much prettier than them. Moreover, they were better at starting fights. They could see other people fighting openly and covertly, and they could also casually join in the fun from the side. The two young ladies by the side did not rush to fix their hair. They only touched up their lipstick in front of the mirror and casually said, "Miss G, the pink diamond you're wearing is the one that was sold for 88 million yuan at the Edinburgh auction at the end of last year, isn't it?" At that time, many people were guessing who this pink diamond would end up in. "I didn't expect it to be worn by you today. I'm so envious." Ji Mengran could tell that the two of them saw that she and Jin Wan were too quiet and wanted to talk about something. She did not mind. If it could make Jin Wan uncomfortable, she was happy to cooperate. Ji Mengran smiled as she touched the pink diamond necklace in front of her collarbone. "It's just a small diamond. You've already brought it up so many times. Even I feel embarrassed hearing it. In the future, I won't dare to wear it so casually. When Brother Sheng gave this necklace to me, I didn't expect it to be so valuable." The two young ladies were still full of envy and jealousy. The smile on Ji Mingran's face grew wider. Jin Wan, on the other hand, remained quiet. She kept her eyes closed and did not participate in any conversation. After the makeup artist fixed her hair, she asked in a low voice, "CEO G, you just drank and ate, right? Your lip makeup also needs to be touched up. Do you want to use our lipstick or the one you brought yourself?" Ji Yunshu didn't know what to say. "Use mine." Jin Wan pointed to her handbag on the table. The makeup artist nodded, walked over, and opened Jin Wan's bag. She was about to look inside and saw a nude lipstick. Just as she was about to take it out, a blue diamond suddenly fell out and landed on the table in front of the mirror, making a soft but slightly crisp sound. Jin Wan nodded. "Jin Wan, don't worry." This sound attracted everyone's attention. The makeup artist who was holding Jin Wan's handbag rushed to apologize. I'm sorry, CEO G. I didn't know you had a necklace in your bag. I'll put it away for you." However, before the makeup artist could touch the necklace, she heard a certain socialite standing by the side cry out in surprise. "This 10-carat round blue diamond." It was only then that Jin Wan opened her eyes. She saw that the makeup artist, who was about to pick up the necklace, was so frightened that she did not even dare to touch it. The blue diamond placed in the middle of the platinum necklace was shining brightly under the light of the mirror. "CEO G, I'm sorry. The makeup artist apologized profusely. "It's all right. Did you find the lipstick?" Jin Wan asked calmly. The makeup artist nodded. "I found it. This nude one, right?" Jin Wan closed her eyes again. She was not in a hurry to put the necklace away, nor did she touch her bag. As though nothing had happened, she continued to wait for the makeup artist to touch up her makeup. However, the others in the dressing room were clearly not as calm as Jin Wan. Chapter 437. The other socialite was also shocked and couldn't believe it. Really? Could it be fake? How could it be fake? Look at the blue diamond. It's not polished at all. It's a pure round diamond. Look at its purity. Based on our research on diamonds, we can tell it's real at a glance. She took a look at Jin Wan in surprise and lowered her voice to say, this blue diamond shocked the whole world's jewelry industry. My family is in the jewelry business. At that time, my father wanted to go abroad to observe it, but he didn't even have a chance to take a look at it before it was already owned by someone. I didn't expect it to be in her hands now. Jean Wan's eyes widened in surprise as she looked at Jean Wan. The two socialites lowered their voices, but in this large dressing room with only the sound of air conditioning, their voices were particularly clear. At this moment, the two makeup artists standing behind Jean Wan and Men Grand did not dare to speak carelessly. The one standing behind Jean Wan's hand was still trembling because she had accidentally touched the blue diamond earlier. Jean Wan knew the value of the blue diamond, but when grandfather Mo handed it to her, she didn't expect it to be so valuable. She looked at the round diamond on the table that was emitting a light blue glow and somehow felt that she had underestimated it when she guessed it was worth hundreds of millions of yuan. This kind of FL-level diamond that could cause a sensation in the global jewelry industry was hard to come by even in 1,000 years. On the other side, Ji Mingran's face was so bad that it couldn't be described as ugly. While no one was paying attention, she raised her hand to pull off the pink diamond necklace around her neck and threw it into her bag. Then she glanced sideways at Jean Wan's blue diamond and was so angry that her teeth itched. Although she had never heard of this blue diamond, she could immediately guess how this diamond fell into Jean Wan's hands from the discussion of these two high-city socialites and the time they said this diamond would be introduced to the world. It was Mo Jingshan. It was the Mo family. Thinking of this, Ji Mengrand clenched her bag even tighter. She thought she had learned enough forbearance in front of Xing Yihan after experiencing so many things outside, but she didn't expect that in front of Jean Wan, she would still be so unreconciled. As they left the dressing room, Ji Mengrand deliberately walked by Jean Wan's side. When she brushed past her, she deliberately whispered, "You have such a valuable diamond in your bag, but you don't wear it. It seems like you're too embarrassed to show it off. After all, it's a gift from your ex-husband. He's long gone, and we're strangers now. How can you wear it to show off?" Jean Wan paused in her footsteps. Just as Ji Mengrand thought that she had successfully touched her heart, Jean Wan blinked, her gaze full of smiles. "If you have the time to worry about me, why don't you check the origin of your pink diamond? The pink diamond that was auctioned off in Edinburgh was once an investor of mine and a gift from my teacher. It's just that a diamond with a girlish heart doesn't really suit me. I've never worn it before. Later, with my mentor's approval, I sent this pink diamond to Edinburgh for auction in the name of charity. I didn't care about what happened afterward, but I didn't expect that it would be bought by Xing Yihan and given to you." Ji Mingran's expression didn't change, but her heart pounded fiercely. Jean Wan withdrew her gaze from her and smiled. "I don't really like wearing jewelry, but it's inevitable that I'm a little impulsive when it comes to diamonds. Women always have a few diamonds they like, but the one you took out to show off is the one I don't like. This pink diamond was sent to Edinburgh in the name of MN Group's donation to the International Group of Children with Heart Disease. In fact, when my mentor gave it to me, it was only worth more than 10 million yuan. I didn't expect it to be auctioned off for 88 million yuan. It seems that I should thank you and Xing Yihan for your generous donation on behalf of those international children with heart disease." Seeing that Ji Mingran's face was about to turn green, Jean Wan smiled again, casually flipped her hair, and turned to go downstairs with a free and easy smile. At this time, the two socialites in the dressing room coughed lightly as they walked past Ji Mengrand. Because Ji Mengrand stood motionless in front of the door like a statue, one of the socialites said in a low voice, "Excuse me, Miss Ji, please excuse me." Ji Mengrand paused, turned her eyes sharply, and met the socialite's half-sympathetic and half-smiling eyes. The socialite looked at her fearlessly, then took the hand of the other socialite next to her and walked away with a faint smile. The two makeup artists in the dressing room were busy packing up and preparing to get off work, not daring to look at the door. Fortunately, they didn't say too much like the two socialites who deliberately stirred up trouble. No one was a fool. After all, Jean Wan was the CEO of MN Group. Even if they weren't familiar with Jean Wan, they knew the status of MN Group in the Chinese business world. Ji Mengran didn't have the awareness of smashing an egg against a rock if she wanted to show off in front of the CEO of MN Group. When Jean Wan went downstairs, she was going to leave when the event in the convention center was over. However, the organizer, the director, and the provincial leaders directly invited the distinguished guests to stay at the seaside resort for 2 nights, and there were already dozens of cars waiting outside. Everyone was here, and it seemed that no one wanted to leave, so Jean Wan didn't want to leave alone, so she got in the car with them. This so-called seaside resort was actually an outdoor entertainment venue specially prepared for the rich. It was a huge resort that stretched as far as the eye could see, so it must have invested a lot of money. The ground was covered with green lawns, and it was said that there were many fitness and entertainment venues behind the holiday villa, including huge indoor and outdoor golf courses. Everyone who came here tonight was of high status, so the accommodation here was not bad. When they arrived, it was already past 11 o'clock at night. There were no other activities at this time, so they just needed to go back to their rooms to rest. Jean Wan took the room card that had been arranged and went straight to her room. After opening the door, she checked the security facilities here before entering. Before she closed the door, she heard 2 CEOs of a certain company walking and talking in the corridor, and they seemed to be talking about Shine Group. Chapter 438. Mo Jingshan would come. As soon as this thought appeared in her mind, Jean Wan closed the door. However, the soundproofing of this room was not very good. The leaders of the city said that they could give more feedback to the higher-ups after staying here. It seemed that they needed to reflect on the soundproofing problem. Because the conversations about Mo Jingshan outside kept coming into her ears from time to time. The 2 CEOs who were talking outside just now probably lived on this floor, standing in the corridor and chatting. For example, they talked about how they could deepen their cooperation with Shine Group and how they could have more suitable contact with CEO Mo without being too awkward. They also talked about how the Mo family had always been low-key. Mo Jingshan rarely appeared on the news, and no media dared to touch the tip of the knife. The domestic search engines did not dare to easily publish information about the Mo family. Occasionally, there would be a few pieces of news about Shine, but they would also be blocked. Occasionally, for the publicity of the company's cooperation projects, Mo Jingshan would give a rare positive response in front of the media, but he was rarely allowed to take photos or videos. There were too many rising companies and people in High City. Mo Jingshan's name was equivalent to a Buddha in the circle. Everyone wanted to get close to him, but few people had the courage to do so. Even if they had the courage, they might not have the ability to get close to him. After all, they were not qualified enough. And these years, there were many women who flocked to Mo Jingshan. Those who knew something about Mo Jingshan only knew that he was once married, but later divorced. Those who didn't know only thought that he was not interested in women, so he never had a woman who was too close to him. He was a very difficult person to conquer. Whether it was the beauties in High City or the managers of various companies, they all wanted to get close to Mo Jingshan, but they couldn't get close to him at all. Jean Wan picked her ears inside the door and felt that it was really necessary to give feedback on this soundproofing problem tomorrow. The people outside were still chatting. From time to time, the CEOs of other companies passing by would say hello, and from time to time, there would be laughter and polite conversations. Jean Wan went to the bathroom to take a shower and changed into a loose and light white t-shirt. After blowing her hair dry, she stood in front of the mirror and patted the lotion on her face. Her fingers caressed her smooth skin, and she recalled that when she was in England, Mr. Zand had once told her that beauty was a woman's best weapon. If coupled with a cold and unshakable heart, she would be invincible. She had never deliberately cared about whether she was beautiful or not. However, her heart had already lost its warmth since 3 years ago. Just like the people around her often said, Mr. Vince ran from High City to London and persisted for 3 years, but she didn't seem to be moved at all. Did she not feel anything at all? Was she not moved at all? Was his heart made of iron? Was his heart moved? Of course not. But was his heart made of iron? No, it was clearly ice. The next morning, Jean Wan got up. In the past few years, she had the habit of exercising as soon as she had time in England. Even if she didn't exercise, she would run for half an hour or do some healthy yoga in her room. There was a gym in the resort. In the morning, many people greeted each other with a white towel around their necks. Some were preparing to go to the gym, and some who had woken up even earlier had already returned. When Jean Wan went out, she simply said hello. There were not many people in the gym, but most of them were in good shape and good at self-management. When those people saw Jean Wan, they stopped to say hello to her. Jean Wan smiled and then withdrew her gaze. She went to the treadmill, pressed a few buttons, and began to focus on running without speaking. During this period, when someone came to say hello, Jean Wan only turned her head and smiled politely. When the other party failed to gain any interest and turned to leave, Jean Wan withdrew her gaze and continued to look at the numbers on the treadmill. Her face was expressionless. After the gym, she returned to her room to take a shower. Today was not a private social event, but a rare holiday for the big shots of the province, city, and high city to gather together. Many people came for the leaders of the province, and many came for Mo Jingshan, even though Mo Jingshan had not been here since last night. In the morning, Jean Wan went to the beach to pick up seashells out of boredom. She had just picked up a small handful of white seashells and was about to take them back to her room to wash when she heard someone say that CEO Mo was coming. Jean Wan was silent for a moment, went back to her room to put the seashells away, washed her hands, and walked out. She happened to follow the crowd to the front gate of the resort. Seeing the car outside, she stood behind the crowd and pretended to be looking forward to it like everyone else. When Mo Jingshan got out of the car, the leaders and bosses came forward to welcome him. Although Jean Wan was behind the crowd, from this angle, she still saw the man approaching in this direction at a glance. In this short moment, the scene in the kitchen of Aolon International when this man rolled up his sleeves and stood by the counter to help her prepare dinner appeared in her mind. Looking at this tall and handsome man who was used to wearing a black suit and shirt, his aura was not covered by the sea of people even when he was surrounded by a crowd. No matter how she looked at it, it was impossible to connect this man with those warm and gentle times in the past. Jean Wan's lips curved slightly. She didn't know why she was smiling. Mo Jingshan's expression was very indifferent. He had long been used to such a scene of people crowding and lining the road to welcome him. When he passed by some people, he would occasionally shake hands with them politely, but most of the time, he just walked past them. Shen Mu, as usual, raised his hand from time to politely stop people from approaching. When he walked to the side, Shen Mu raised his hand again and was about to separate Mo Jingshan from the crowd when he saw Jean Wan standing in the crowd. His hand paused and subconsciously wondered if he should ask CEO Mo to shake hands with Jean Wan. However, when Mo Jingshan's gaze landed on Jean Wan's face, he had already calmly retracted it. Even though Shen Mu had intentionally led the crowd in this direction, Jean Wan also consciously took a step back. However, she did not expect that she would step on the skirt of the person behind her. The person behind her was probably a rich lady or a rich lady. The moment she was stepped on, she frowned in dissatisfaction. "What are you doing? Can't you be more careful?" As she spoke, the person behind her pushed Jean Wan's back. "You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.